you will.
Good catch.
Me too. Just started.
I want to tell you guys that I have a investment committee meeting tonight of Judson Church, which I don't want to go to. I'm not going to really go to, but at some point I'm going to cut out and go to it for a minute or two and say, hi, invest the money well, goodbye. So when I cut out and come back in, that's what's happening. Has nothing to do with what somebody just said.
Right. If we are lucky, you'll be able to join us for business session.
Yes, I will. This is obviously not only the one I prefer to go to, but also the more important one. And
We
the,
are we are on our team.
the investment committee, I mean, they're going to do their own thing. So
I think Michael Levine wants to be elevated.
There are also three other, besides Michael, three other board members in the attendee column. Lois Rakoff, Carter
So,
Booth, and Anthony Wong.
so what do I do? I'm allowing them to talk. Bob, is that what I do?
Yeah, I mean,
We should promote them. I'll promote them.
Okay, because I don't see where I can promote them.
Yeah, I got it.
All right. See, that's why I got Will. I got a youngin. Great. What time is it? Oh shit. Wasn't what I wanted to do. 6:33. We're gonna wait 2 more minutes and then we'll get this started.
well, maybe I can tell them right now that I'm coming back. Right.
Hello, everyone.
What we
Thank you
want to
for,
see is there are members from Greenwich House that we're going to want to elevate. So let me just see, Darren Block. Will, can you elevate Darren Block?
Yep.
And Judy Levin. And Darren, once you're on, if you can tell me if there's anybody else that needs to be elevated. Okay, so Darren, you're with us. Darren is on his phone, I know. Darren, if there's anyone you would like us to elevate other than Judy. Hi, Judy. Let us know.
Hi.
All right.
Sounds
let
good.
me
I think Laura Langner from our team was also trying to sign on. I don't know if she was able to yet. She
Yep.
had some family matter.
I see her.
Thank you, Will.
and in the chat, Frederica Siegel wants to be elevated.
Thank you.
She's elevated. She's here.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't see it.
Okay, great. I think we'll get started. Hello, everybody. Hi, Frederica. This is the March meeting of the Human Services Committee of Community Board 2 Manhattan. Tonight we have we have 2 agenda items, but 1 presenter. Our guest tonight is members of the staff of Greenwich House, and they're going to talk about 2 different topics. One is any changes to the way they operate and the services that they deliver in the face of a new RFP, request for proposals, that the city's Department for the Aging issued about 1.5 years ago, I think, October of 2020. And the second issue that also relates to Greenwich House is work that they've been doing to help kind of carpet Washington Square Park with a series of social service providers. This was an effort that was begun by the Manhattan Borough President at the time, Gail Brewer. Last summer, there was a lot of hoopla going on in the park, and Gail had the idea of bringing together a bunch of social service providers who do outreach for homelessness and substance abuse and harm reduction, and seeing if they could get a sort of full 7-week schedule of outreach in the park. And Greenwich House was tapped to collaborate, to coordinate that. And then we'll break into business session where we will discuss a resolution for the Greenwich House effort in the park, and we'll also discuss a resolution for 231 Grand Street. So we're going to start out with introductions, and then we'll toss it off to Greenwich House. I'm Susanna Aaron. I am the chair of this committee. I'm just going to go through the list as I see people. William?
Hi, Will Benish, committee member and CB2 member.
Wayne?
Wayne Kwadler, CB2 member, committee member.
Ryder?
Ryder Kessler, same as them.
Ivy?
Ivy Kwan, a community member, CB2.
Just looking for members of our committee. John?
Good evening, John DeVerna, committee member, CB2 member.
And Rachel.
I'm the public member for the Social Services Committee, Human Services Committee. Thank you.
I also see some other members of CB2 on this call. One is Bob Gormley, our district manager, and Janine Kiley, our chair. I'm just going to introduce them myself. I also see Michael Levine and Lois Rakoff and Frederica Siegel, Anthony Wong, and Carter Booth. So I think I'm going to toss it to Greenwich House to talk about the new RFP. So just some background. A couple of years ago, before Darren joined Greenwich House was run by a gentleman named Roy Levitt, who shared with us the frustrations of having to conform to a very strict model of service delivery that was called for by the Department for the Aging, DFTA, we call it DFTA. In the course of time, DFTA put out a new request for proposals to its habitual contractors. And the idea of it was to inject some innovation into the way that services are delivered to seniors, and what senior centers can do and what senior service providers can do. So we've been waiting for a long time. Actually, Darren has been very patient. I keep checking in with him every few months to see, like, did you get a new contract? What's the new contract? What are your changes? And this time he has graciously agreed to join us and just give us an update of where it stands now. So Darren, go ahead. You can introduce yourself and your team, and then take over.
Thanks for that, Susanna. Thanks. And honestly, for the last year, thanks for the inputs and the support and the interest in what we're doing. I'm Darren Block. I'm the executive director and CEO of Greenwich House. I was very excited that we might have had our first meeting in 2 years all together. But the flip side is I was able to drive my daughter to softball practice and still be here with you. So I'll take that for what it's worth. I'll let my two colleagues introduce themselves real quick, and then we'll jump in. Judy, you want to give yourself a quick introduction, and then Laura?
Yeah, sure. I am Judy Levin. I'm the Director of Older Adult Services at Greenwich House.
And I am Laura Langner. I am the Chief Health and Human Service Officer at Greenwich House.
I didn't hear that very well. I'm sorry, Laura, can you just, what's Laura's title? Her audio is
I
not.
am the Chief Health and Human Service Officer at Greenwich House.
Thank you. Chief Health and Human Service Officer at Greenwich House. Thank you. Go ahead.
And I'll notice for purposes of both of these conversations, Laura has assumed a new role that's overseeing and helping coordinate a mix of our health and human services. And she's also been helping drive some of the thinking that we're doing around a new workforce that we're looking to create, which dovetails nicely into this conversation. So as Susanna said, Darren, I joined Greenwich House about 2 years ago.
One second.
The points raised.
Darren,
I was thrilled to see.
I just want to interrupt. Your audio is not excellent. So if at any point things get really choppy, oh yeah, that's good. Take yourself off video. Good, great. Go ahead.
No worries. And let me know if it's easier for me to call in on a line versus what I'm doing on the computer. Let me know.
No, this is good. So
terrific. So all I was noting is I came in about 2 years ago, as Susanna noted. I had been very proud to learn about the mix of older adult services we were offering. A lot of strong work, but what was a restriction was that we were forced to do the exact same thing in all of our spaces, regardless of the space, how well the space was oriented to the mix of programs that we wanted to be doing and that we thought could best serve our members in the community. And so when this new RFP was opened up to providers to provide a submission, we saw a really neat opportunity to really rethink the mix of services and spaces that we were supporting older adults in the neighborhood. And it was really the heart of what the city was trying to encourage providers to do, to rethink what they were doing, how they were doing it, and where they were doing it. What we proposed after a series of discussions with our internal advisory committees across our centers, with partners like the community board and other partners in the area, we proposed an approach that puts us under a what the city is calling a network, which means that we are no longer hosting a series of independent older adult spaces, but in fact, the city is now looking at all of our spaces as one cohesive network of services that enables us a much greater freedom to specialize some services to the locations, to a location, and to the way that physical space can best support services, and allow us to also bring in some specialized help. It allows us to do sharing across our spaces, which is pretty neat. And in addition to us being a network of sites, I think one of the more interesting things we got out of this RFP was the city has given us a new senior center location. So we are expanding from 4 locations in this general catchment area to a 5th location at the Westbeth Artist Houses, which, you know, for anyone on this board and anyone who knows the area, Westbeth is, by, you know, everything except for formality, a NORC. It is a naturally occurring retirement community where the services and supports and enrichment and help that we try to bring older adults in our community, we thought it would just be a perfect fit. The management at Westbeth was excited to have us, and the city, in its great wisdom, saw the value in that and gave us that 5th space.
Wait,
So
Aaron, you just tick
we-
off the
yep.
4, tick off the 4 sites, the other 4 sites, is Westbeth is one is,
Yep,
Okay.
we have Independence Plaza down in the Tribeca area. We have Center on the Square, which is at Washington Square North. And we have Our Lady of Pompeii, Bleecker and Carmine in that location. The 4th site is our Barrow Street location, which had been the JCW Older Adult Center. And in addition to adding a new site at Westbeth, the other innovation that we were able to get the city's support on was the idea of converting the JCW space at our 27 Barrow Street location from a general or generic older adult center into a space that can focus and specialize on work, skills, service, and other supports that that the city has very few of in terms of a focus on older adults in those areas. And so we propose that older adults, both the way DIFTA describes an older adult, 65 and over, as well as aging adults in the workforce, 55 and 60 and over, are increasingly feeling strains and challenges to stay in the workforce, either because they need to stay in the workforce or they want to, and they're feeling the effects of ageism. They're feeling the effects of a disconnect to technology, some skills development and the like. And so we thought at this time in our city's both economic arc, as well as the needs for older adults and aging adults, that a space that was really dedicated on building up skills and supports, workforce connections and the like, was an important investment in our neighborhood and our area. So that was a major additional element. There's several other aspects to it, but and I'll invite Judy and Laura to sprinkle those in. But with all of that out there right now, Susanna, I'll pause maybe and just see if there are any questions off that. If there are no immediate questions, I'll also turn it just to Judy and invite her to or Laura to add any elements to that.
well, I'll start with one question, which is just, I would love to know, now that this network exists, I mean, has the transition to a network already happened? And if so, what is happening at each of these centers? I don't know if I'm jumping ahead of things.
No, I think that's a fine point to ask. So as a practical matter, sorry, Laura, what was that?
I thought I was in. Go ahead, Darren.
I was just gonna offer that as a practical matter. We did sign the contract to initiate that network approach in December, and we've been spending the better part of the beginning of this year putting those elements in place. As a formal matter, we are working under that contract. As a practical matter, we're adding an entire space at Westbeth, which is taking, several weeks, if not several months, to reconfigure and to get that space outfitted the way we want it. The JCW space, the 27 Barrow Street location I mentioned, that was going to be a workforce training and resource hub. We're applying several $100,000 of investments into that space to get that right sized and right fit for the services we want to do there. So those two locations are still under construction, but the rest of our locations have been open and in fact opening more and more as some of the COVID restrictions melt a bit.
And one more question before I allow other people in our on our here to ask questions. I know that meals are always a very a subject of keen interest among your membership. Someone that needs to mute themselves. Has the meal service changed at JCW?
So I was going to answer that, Darren, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is Laura Langner, and I think the thing that Darren was bringing out was the services include both meals as well as activities. And one of the really great things that just happened this week is DIFTA finally lifted the cap on having how many people could be on site for in-person meals. So we are finally this week permitted to go back to 100%, which is fabulous. We are going to keep grab and go meals as well, though, because it's so popular with a number of people. And just to the point of Westbeth, we actually have started enrolling, even though the center's not open, we have had space on site where we are enrolling new members, offering activities, and as of tomorrow, we are starting a walking club there as well. So we may not have the center, but we have started offering services. Congregate meals right now at JCW, there's about 20 meals a day that get picked up. We continue to offer grab and go at that location for those individuals that are still interested. But the thing that's really interesting is, as a network, they can now go to any site in the network and receive the exact same meal, hot meal prepared with their community, and now be able to sit with other members that they have for the past 2 years making friends with from across the network. So COVID had us creating all of these remote classes where in the past people only knew who was at their center, and now they've come to know people across the centers. And so they can go to any center, pick up a grab and go, or sit down in person and stay for the class afterwards or go to the class ahead of time. At JCW, we are continuing, at least for the near future until Westbeth opens fully, to offer the grab and go meals there to the few people that are still interested in receiving it from that location. Most of the other individuals have already started receiving meals at our other network sites.
Wait, I'm just confused about something. Because I think you said that you can get the same meal in each of your centers. I know that you guys have big fans of the cook who's at JCW, and that people are less enthusiastic about Our Lady of Pompeii. Are you saying that the food that is served at JCW can now be had at Our Lady of Pompeii as well?
No, what I'm saying is we closed that kitchen some months ago, and we have been serving the same catered meal across all sites.
Oh, so the JCW kitchen has been closed?
Yes.
Okay, that's
our hope is that in creating this workforce site, it's not only for computer class, but it could also be for food handler class. We intend to use the kitchen for education, training, workforce opportunities. It's a commercial licensed kitchen, and we want to take advantage of that.
Let me open it up to members of our committee. Does anyone want to ask any questions? Okay, I have some questions. Sorry,
Let me
I have-
also, I'll also just touch on
Yeah.
a point that came up in the chat about transportation needs. As part of our response to the city's proposal, one of the elements that we were most excited about was the idea of including some kind of pilot program which would have provided a transportation ring, if you will, that would connect all of our centers to help move people from one center to the other and around this neighborhood a little better. We know that transportation for many older adults and really for many New Yorkers with all sorts of challenges, it's an issue. And it was a little frustrating that the city's view was that if you look in our neighborhood generally, there's a rich network of subways and buses. Our point, of course, is that for many either disabled or older adults, you can have a subway station right outside your door that does not make getting around our neighborhood easier. And so I bring it up to say, one, it's a point well made that transportation is a major issue. Two, we are continuing to explore creative ways to try to make transport from our centers easier for seniors. We don't have an answer yet now. It obviously comes down to funding like so many things, but I just wanted to spot it, Susanna, as something that we are thinking about looking at.
Can you also tell me, I'm going to turn to Lois and Michael in a second, how is your membership receiving this? Because I know that one of the issues that you guys have struggled with is that a feeling that considering the population that's in the senior population that's in your catchment area, your membership could be stronger. And I think that's one of the reasons why you wanted to revisit some of your services. Is it too soon to say what effect this is having on your membership?
I think it's probably too soon to say that. And Judy has probably the longest tenure of experience working with our current membership. So Judy, feel free to please jump in on some of this. But my quick early observation is that just to give the committee some general numbers, we've got Greenwich House averages about 2,000 registered members a year across our various sites. If you look at, I don't have it exactly in front of me, but if you looked at some of the recent census data, I think our district roughly has, I think, somewhere between 10 and 12,000 older adults, 65 and over. And this creates an interesting observation for all of us, and it did for the city as well. The idea of who are these public investments for? Who are we creating space and place and community building for? My answer, and I think many of yours might be, we should be creating spaces that are welcoming and supportive of all comers, of all types, of all needs, of all wants. And those needs, we at Greenwich House are in a particularly interesting position doing social service work and multi-purpose social service work in an area that, if you look at many objective measures, Community Board 2 is doing quite nicely on education outcomes and healthcare outcomes and economic outcomes and criminal justice outcomes. But there are still pockets of need everywhere in our city. By the way, this ties into some of the conversations you guys are going to be having later on. And so for us, it's really important to make sure that the spaces we create are as inviting and as supportive for members who might have done well in their lives and figured out retirement in a planned way, as well as those who are struggling economically and continue to live in or near poverty or have special social or health needs. So for us, the answer needs to be that these spaces are for everyone. And so I'd say, and so this all goes back to the question of, should we be serving more neighbors than the 2,000 that we have registered? And I would always say, yes, please, let's take all comers. Anyone who would be interested, we would welcome them in. I think it's a really interesting exercise in how do we get people to know about our spaces and places, and the impression that I think many New Yorkers have about what these city-supported senior centers do and are. And it's something that we confront quite regularly in terms of, I think many New Yorkers feeling like, oh, those places are not for me. I don't need help with a meal, or that's for someone else. And the reality is, no, these are for everyone. And we really go out of our way to create spaces that are inviting to everyone. But Judy, please add to that if you would.
Yeah. And I think your question, Susanna, the question of whether people were able to transition to the model of the grab and go and not having the kitchen. We had a number of town halls, and we communicated regularly with the people that were not ready for the transition or were not open to it. And what we found, interestingly enough, with the opening of the grab and go during this melting, as Darren said, of this pandemic time, is that people have actually been going to some of the other centers because they were not going to Judith C. White, and becoming part of those centers. Interestingly, Our Lady of Pompeii has gotten more interest because people were, it was so close, people were visiting that center, and Center on the Square people have been coming over for their lunch, who were generally the people that you might have seen over at Judith C. White. And an interesting thing also is that since the staff from the Judith C. White Center have been hired throughout the other centers and have moved throughout the other centers, they're familiar faces at these other centers as well. So that's been a welcoming piece for many people.
Thanks. Lois Rakoff?
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm familiar with most of the centers. I would like to know more about West Beth. I know West Beth as an artist residence, but before it joined the network, was it a older adult center? And if so, what did it do? And then did it have to petition to be in the network for Greenwich House?
So go ahead, Laura.
No, go ahead, Judy.
No, so it's
somebody.
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, because I think they have had many older adult activities on site at this through their own community programs, but there was not a dedicated older adult center with a range of services, and this is completely new. Becoming part of the network, it's what we built ourselves in terms of a piece of the network, and we are working with and trying to incorporate a lot of the wishes and needs of the people that are at West Beth.
I think
so you'll be giving art lessons. Oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, I think
go ahead.
It's important to know that Greenwich House already had a presence at West Beth. So we have a case manager that works there Monday through Friday. We have a mental health clinic established at West Beth. And so when they were looking and we were looking for partnerships, it was a natural partnership since we were both already known to each other.
Yeah.
And while each center in the network has a, focus area, for lack of a better word, all of the centers are going to be responsive to the members that go there. So while the focus at West Beth may be making sure there's social services, we can bring in other partners like tax preparation and legal services and case management and all those things. That doesn't mean we're not going to do a walking class and a dance class and a Tai Chi and some of those things. It really is going to be about, what do the members want?
Yes, are you going to form a council there, just like in the other, like in center on the square? Will there be a council?
Absolutely.
And
there will be an advisory council.
My last question is, will it be in the community center per se, or will it be at another area in West Beth?
So there's a separate building on the site called, you may have heard of the I building. There's a separate building that we are modifying and doing some renovations so that it is accessible and will fit the needs. It's actually a very beautiful, light, airy space on the grounds, but not in the building. So it's separate from the community room.
Good. So it's not at 155 Bank Street. It's, what is it, around the corner, so to speak, facing the water?
Yes.
Great.
Good. Thank you.
Michael Levine.
Yes, hi. Thank you for the presentation and congratulations and good luck on your expansion. I have a question which may sound silly, but I have no idea. I've never thought of this before. Is there a charge for any of the services that you provide anywhere in the network, or is all of this underwritten by your DFTA grant?
Not silly at all. The services that we offer are all free. It's something that both under the city contract and fundraising efforts that we undertake. When older adults come in for meals, they are invited to provide some modest charge cost if they want to offset our cost for meals. It's a donation, exactly, $1, $2. But no, there is no charge for any of the services.
And there's no charge for membership. No charge for membership anywhere in the network.
No.
Good. Thank you.
Are there any questions from our committee or from community members of Community Board 2? I see 2 attendees with their hands raised, and I'd like to call on you, but I just want to preface that we are hearing comment tonight on this agenda item and on the next one. We're not hearing comment tonight on 231 Grand Street. If you would still like to comment, I will call on you, but I just want to let you know that we're not taking comments on 231 Grand Street. So let's start with Henry Lamb. Henry Lamb, you can talk.
Yeah, I was going to comment regarding Greenwich, which is the senior centers.
Yes.
Why can't we have this in Grand Street?
I appreciate that, Henry. My understanding is that between Education Alliance,
sorry, I don't see any city-funded community center for seniors in Chinatown that I know of.
I don't know the terrain of.
That's exactly the case, Susan. You don't know the terrain of Chinatown.
No, I don't know the terrain beyond CB2. I don't. But I know my understanding.
So can I say that there are senior centers in Chinatown and in different areas, and what I would suggest is that if you go to difta.gov.org, you will be able to click where is the closest center near me, and they will give you a list of all the centers in whatever area you're looking for.
I can't expect an 80-year-old non-native speaker to do that, right?
It is available in other languages.
Okay.
Thank you, Henry. Judy Yip, did you have a comment you wanted to make about Greenwich House? Oh, actually, I don't see her anymore. I see her hand is raised, but I don't. Oh, here we go. Judy Yip. You're on. Can you unmute yourself? Judy, we have you up, but you're muted. Is there a comment you'd like to make on this? All right, Judy, if you want to come back, let us know. Great. And I don't see any other hands raised. Will, do you? Okay, in that case, we'll put this subject. Thank you guys so much. We'll be interested in hearing periodic updates about your services and your operation, also the effect on your membership and whether your membership is growing. So let's switch gears. We have new presentation by the same people. And this is about Washington Square. I'm just going to give a little bit of background. So last summer, in what I call the post-pandemic pandemonium period, there was a lot of concern about behaviors in Washington Square Park. And Gail Brewer, who was the Manhattan Borough president at the time, organized a working group that met weekly. And her aim was to, enroll service providers in the district, in the neighborhood, in the area, to essentially fill a weekly calendar of outreach so that at any point during the week, the park was kind of covered with someone who was providing either harm reduction outreach, or connection to substance abuse programs, or homeless outreach, or so on. Greenwich House was tapped to coordinate this, which they did valiantly. And my understanding is that, catch me if I have this, if I'm wrong about this, Darren, there were very few additional grants provided to do this work, right? It was all primarily done on existing budgets. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The effort when the need arose, it really was us and probably about 12 or 15 other providers just rallying any resources that we had or that happened to have come to us coincidentally at that time that we could divert into the area. But you're correct.
So one of the tricky things about this, it's kind of I think of it as a catch-22. Question for me has been like, it's great to provide all these social service opportunities in the park. Is that actually going to change behavior, or are the people who are in the park, maybe they don't want these services, right? So is this a good way for us to spend our money? The answer to that question relies on data collection. The answer to the data collection relies on some money to spend some effort to do data collection, which is a whole other effort. This effort has not had money, so it's kind of the catch is like we need to give it money. Maybe we need to give it money to see if it works and deserves money. Anyway, but before I get to my sense about that, Darren, just tell us where you guys stand with that and how you think it's gone and what you're seeking right now.
Yep, I appreciate that. So as Susanna said, and just to bring everybody back a year, because it was really kind of a year this month or so that we got pulled into this. I think Washington Square Park, as happens, for anyone who's been in the area the last several years, you have that spring thaw, and there is certainly an emergence of energy that we see in that park and a lot of our parks, a lot of our community parks and public spaces, and we were seeing that on steroids as folks were coming out of the COVID lockdown. And so what I'd say is we were invited by the borough president's office to join a group of other social service providers in exploring a very specific question. And I want to differentiate two things that were happening then at the park and kind of are always a presence of the park. So one issue that I think was challenging for the community was there was a, for lack of a better term, there was an overexuberance of youthful sort of enjoyment of the park. And I will not say quiet enjoyment, because I know much of it was not quiet enjoyment, but the idea was that there was there were activities in the park that might have been felt to be kind of antisocial or anti-community, but that was not what we were called in to address. What we were called in to address as social service providers were a mix of human challenges and conditions that are perennial issues, but that had gotten exacerbated. And that was around substance use and misuse, tied to homelessness, tied to mental health issues, which, right, all of these are a complicated mix of human conditions and challenges. What we were able to do last year was, and really Laura Langner drove the efforts. I think she might have just fallen off here, but if she comes back on, I'll certainly give her space to frame it. But basically what we did was we worked alongside the Parks Department and several city agencies to map out a schedule where we could send a mix of peer counselors, other mental health and substance use counselors into the space in order to extend as many types of human service and social service supports as we could to individuals in and around the park. To points that Susanna raised, and as I'm sure this committee and other members are sensitive to this point, we were confronting human challenges that were, in many cases, lifetimes in the making. And so the idea that we were going to solve these problems in one interaction or over a couple interactions was certainly not our expectation and goal, but the idea is around a concept called harm reduction. And the idea that a steady mix of trusted and authentic and appropriate interventions and supports can help an individual on their journey towards recovery and a more balanced lifestyle. So that was our goal. To points raised, we were not funded. Our partners in the work were not funded, and they were many. And so what we started to do last summer and again over the winter and early spring this year is to introduce to many elected officials in our area a model of how that type of work can be sustained at least through this year, and really to the extent that this is not a unique problem to Washington Square Park, but you see it at Union Square Park, and you see it in other corridors, whether it's 125th Street corridor, or whether it's Gramercy Park or Penn Station. But this is not an uncommon occurrence when the weather warms and you see these challenges clustering around an area. And so we began to circulate, really to anyone who will listen, a model of how a network of providers, a coalition of providers, can map out a series of support services over time, and all of which hopefully would wind up to what Susanna said, which is also a tracking of data and interactions and an understanding of how these interactions are helping individuals and the broader community in the short term and in the long term. So that was the goal then. That continues to be our hope and goal now. The one update I'll offer you, Susanna and committee, is 2 weeks ago, Borough President Mark Levine actually reconvened the Coalition of the Willing that we had last summer. And we launched our first new meeting of the year in order to understand who still had some resources, interest, means to engage again. We're still obviously working to figure out kind of who's got what and where. But I'll just note that we did start to reconvene to figure out what we can offer this spring and summer.
So I have two questions. The first question is just what are you guys asking for? Because I know you would like us to support you, and I personally would like to support you. What are you asking for?
Yep. So and by the way, if my video starts to dilute my
yeah, we'll let you know. Believe me, we'll let you know.
The ask is simple. The ask is we had asked for funding of a group to be supported as a coordinator, as a quarterback, if you will, on the effort. It's something that Laura Langener and our team volunteered her time to do last year. But really, the idea is making sure that that blocks of time every day of every week throughout each season are covered by a social service provider that would have a team there. They're not going to be there all the time, every hour of every day. But the idea is that they're making rotations, a tour of duty, if you will, through the park with some regularity, so that at least every time of day, morning, afternoon, evening, are covered every day of the week. So someone who's coordinating the effort, that was one ask. The second ask was we were able to hire 2 certified peer advocates, peer specialists, to do a lot of this intervention, along with a licensed mental health substance use counselor. We were able to bring those 4 positions in because we had gotten a one-time grant from the state, as did many of our other providers, that gave us the capacity to have trained bodies to deploy. That was a one-time funding source that we know is going to end. And so the other ask was to make sure that I think as many as 9 or 10 other organizations are supported with some amount of funding to hire up a team of 2 to 4 specialists that could be part of that rotation. So those were really the 2 big asks: a coordinating body and funding the specialists.
So, okay, so then I want to talk about data collection, because my frustration with all this has been that it's a nice idea. I don't know if it works. So how do we find out if it works? And my memory of these meetings is that all of these groups were asked to collect data, but it's really beyond their scope. And there was really no data collected. So my interest from the perspective of me at CB2 is, what do we need to ask for in order to get the data collected to show proof of concept? It's an interesting concept, but to prove the concept, we would need to have no more.
Well, I think there's for those who aren't familiar with some of these systems, I'll just note that there's that old adage that you care about what you measure, and you end up measuring what you care about. And so there's a little bit of a chicken and egg there. For us, and Susanna, you're alluding to it, there was no requirement for any of these parties to track data, because all of us were doing it basically out of goodwill and an interest in trying to serve a need that we saw out there. But because there was no actual fund, a requirement that is typically tied to funding or something like that, it was hard, like we had no carrot or stick with which to encourage our partners to track data. So that was one. The second challenge is that I'll just note anybody who does street level outreach will understand this problem. If there is no more delicate and intimate engagement than engaging someone on the street who's either homeless or dealing with either a substance use or mental health challenge, and trying to have a sensitive, intimate conversation with them at the same time that you're tracking some elements of that interaction. And so the nature of data tracking in this type of field tends to be a little bit softer and more amorphous. And so part of it is actually simply us having tools and, again, funding to develop tools that would allow us to figure out how to track that in a new way. So for instance, one model is that even a third person, a part of every team that sits aside, that is not part of that direct engagement unit, but their responsibility is to help manage that tracking and work through that so that it is not disruptive or it doesn't interfere with the actual. So that's just an example of a way to do that. All I'll say on it is we are as interested as anyone in data tracking, because as folks going out there, you want to know if the things you're doing and trying are working, and if not, you pivot and you keep exploring. So it's something we're thinking about all the time, but those were some of the practical and less obvious challenges we had last year.
Great, thanks that. John Paul, do you have a question?
Hi, thank you. Yeah. I guess maybe what I'm wondering is maybe what Susanna touched on a little bit is, it sounds nice. Did you guys make any actionable or like demonstrable contact with anyone when you went out last year?
Yeah,
Like,
we had thousands of contacts. I mean,
Yeah.
there were thousands of contacts that happened, and
but what's a
I think-
contact? What I guess I mean is, did people actually enroll in services? To me, it seems like it sounds great. I don't know if the people who were there during these periods are there necessarily looking for the services you're offering. And then wouldn't it be better if an existing city agency who already handles this type of work goes out there versus creating another good intentioned entity that's going out?
Yeah, so the way the city actually funds, and actually most of the groups that went out were the city funded infrastructure that does this work. So the DHS, HRA, the DOHMH, these are entities that fund community groups like us to do street outreach like this in different settings in different places. So this is the city's mechanism to do this work. That said, John, I'll note that if you asked almost anybody that a street outreach worker connects with about what they want and need, what you will hear almost universally is a safe place to lay their head, that they don't feel threatened or intimidated, and that they feel, and that has the services and supports they need to get better over time. And the reality is our city does not have remotely enough of those spaces and places. So yeah.
No, I did my concern, and maybe this will come up more in the next one. We put a lot of money to these well-intentioned organizations or these shelters, maybe even. And, maybe the point that was raised to you, hey, we just need a safe place, is actually the answer, not another shelter or not maybe another outreach team out there, but actually funding going to the root cause of why these people maybe continue to be on the street. But
well, let me
maybe
bring
that's
up
me
two
putting
things.
my opinion.
Yeah. Well, you touch on something that's a root cause. The root cause that you find most folks in a setting where they're either housing unstable or they're straight up homeless is usually a mix of economic pressures and health or mental health challenges, and usually those things coming together. So if you're talking about root causes, us investing massive more amounts in our mental health and healthcare infrastructure on the prevention side, that is something that could get at root causes. And on the point of shelter and space, the biggest challenge for every outreach worker is we are not meeting folks at a point where they're looking for help and services. No, they're in a park, hanging out and either buying drugs, using drugs, or hanging out is every right to do. But that is where the interaction happens, to invite somebody to find service and find a different path in a different way. And it's hard work and it's long-term work. And anybody who's ever done any of this for a day or for 10 years will tell you that it's not one interaction and one intervention that's ever going to get somebody on the right path. It's a series of interactions and a series of conversations. And so again, talking about tracking data, and did it have any notable difference? A handful of people over the course of those 5 or 6 months definitely went from an interaction with a caseworker and a social worker to some kind of help. But the vast majority of folks, it's a matter of getting them over time and to find that help and service, or that one moment that's going to click for them where they want to go. But the second thing, and you said it, is Gail Brewer and I wrote an op-ed last year on the point that we need and we should have more outreach services available and more support services to grab someone when they're ready to take that helping hand. But there is not a single investment we can make more important than more shelters, better shelters, and shelters that support individuals with health or mental health or substance use needs.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer. I think the additional touches, I think you've helped me understand that. The idea of more shelters maybe is something I wouldn't necessarily adopt of your thought there, but I appreciate your entertaining my question.
Well, listen, I would rather than being permanent housing, not shelters, but the reality of our system is that, and the reality, by the way, of the theory of thinking behind the shelter system is not that a shelter is a permanent stop. It's a place to get somebody righted in order to take that next step. And we can have a debate of whether that's the right theory of change for how to move someone from an area of instability to stability. Because we have 700,000, we have 400,000 registered residents of NYCHA, 400,000 registered residents in NYCHA facilities. The rough estimate is 700,000 New Yorkers live across our NYCHA complexes, but we haven't made that kind of investment in affordable housing in decades, really. And so, so I think shelters are viewed as a way to house those who are right now housing unstable. But you know, we can have that debate about what the better theory is, for sure.
Yeah, maybe getting out of your space a little bit, but maybe just familiar with it here. Do you know the cost that they devote per head at these shelters? Over the course of, say, a year?
$1,200 a night or something thereabouts, $1,200 to $1,500 a night.
It costs $1,500 a night to house someone at one of the shelters?
That's my understanding.
But you're not answering that as an expert on shelters.
I'm not a shelter provider. I don't have shelters.
Right.
Because I think there's plenty of information out there on shelters, but I don't think that Darren, for all his expertise, I don't think he's an expert on shelters.
Yep, I'm not. I appreciate that.
Right, Darren, I didn't mean to try to pin you on that. I'm just trying to get a general sense of this allocation of funds versus maybe hotel rooms or some alternative that's dispersed and not a concentrated population. Thank you again.
It's so interesting how any conversation that you have in New York, you end up like in a morass.
Well, honestly, any conversation you have in New York actually comes back down to housing at some level. I mean, honest to God, it just comes down to housing, whether that's attracting workers or dealing with our most needy New Yorkers.
And mental health, whatever. Okay, anyway, moving on though. Ryder, do you have something?
Yeah, thanks. So I think it's great to hear about all this work that you've been doing. And I think, it's obvious that these kinds of interpersonal connections and offers of services and harm reduction are critical when paired with high quality non-congregate shelter options and long-term affordable and supportive housing. All of it has to go together, but the work you're doing is obviously essential. I wanted to ask about some reporting that just came out a couple of hours ago about the Washington Square Park Conservancy and some of its own activities around the park at this same period of time. And I guess my question is did you find yourself supported, impeded, competed with by other institutions that wanted to take a different approach to what's happening in the park, either at the time that you expanded your work or now are moving forward? And is there a role we can play in kind of mediating between different institutions with different philosophies of how to approach the challenges?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I did see that article before I jumped on this call. I was a little bit, I guess, baffled by some of what that article was, I guess, trying to associate with something that was untoward or something like this. As someone who's worked at the intersection of public-private for about a decade now, I get that there's always scrutiny when you have private dollars trying to advance some kind of public good, because there's always a question of motivation and who's pulling strings and all these type of things. So I get the general scrutiny, but to your question, no, there was nothing but honestly like universal interest and support in groups, including the Washington Square Park Conservancy, Village Alliance, and others who literally would come out and just say, "What, we get the point, we get what you're trying to accomplish. What do you need? What can we do?" So much so that I mean, there were conversations to points about raising dollars from government or otherwise to support this infrastructure. You know, every group that we talked to, including the Conservancy, said if we can help advance that point with local electeds and others, we understand the value of it and we're supportive. So I found that a little perplexing, but I hope that answers some of.
Yeah, I mean, that's really encouraging to hear. I think there's a interpretation that maybe there's a set of folks who want a more police first, get folks away and out approach, and that could be in opposition to or counterproductive to the outreach that you all are doing. I think that's the perception that could be a misperception, but just to name it.
No, and right. And let me just, I will address that though pretty squarely, because I know we attended a couple of the community events last year around the topic. And I tried to differentiate it when I first started talking on the topic, but I'll put even a finer point on it. I mean, because of the nature of the work we were doing, engaging folks who by definition were engaged in illegal activity, there was a sensitivity between where policing and over policing, appropriate policing, where that line started and stopped in the work we were trying to do. And there were conversations, and I think the police department and the parks department were very, to their credit, were sensitive to the point we were trying to raise, which is that if there was police engagement that was appropriate and needed, like, we're not going to stand in the way of what you need to do, but also understand that if what we're trying to do and all we were trying to do was introduce service and human service supports to those who need it, we're confronting a health issue. We were helping our neighbors and New Yorkers who were dealing with a health issue, and that's a mental health or substance abuse type of issue there. And so we were certainly encouraging folks to understand and bring sensitivity to what we're trying to do, and not criminalize that as much as trying to give us space to have a positive interaction. And people were receptive.
Thank you, Ryder. We have 3 members of the public, actually one from Senator Brad Holman's office. Henry Lamb, I'll call on you again. Is this about Washington Square Park? Go ahead.
So my question is, you're doing these outreach for Washington Square Park. If the homeless individual decides to go into service, where would you bring them? To the closest shelter? Where is that location at?
So part of the coalition that we had brought together had a number of providers that had emergency shelter and social support shelters around the city. So they were already working in the West Village, East Village catchment area. So they would take the lead with, and which happened, more than a few times last year, able to bring someone to shelter on site if that's what someone wanted or needed.
But
Is
what
that-
location?
Is that
Because my question is more, what location will you bring them to? Because from my understanding, there is no shelter by Washington Square Park. The closest
Yeah,
one
I'll
is
also
North-
just note, just to separate the conversation about the site that you guys might be talking about later in this. Frequently, it's not even necessarily the shelter that is in proximity to the location that an individual is coming from. It's frequently where there's an empty bed or where there's a bed with the types of support services that a specific individual might need. So I just want to
Understand.
differentiate that.
So there was an argument by a CEO Housing Work that argued, if you have a need for shelter in the area because of a homeless population, you should have a shelter in the area. there is a huge homeless population at Washington Square Park. By that, based on that logic, you should probably build a shelter by Washington Square Park. Would you agree with that, Darren?
That's actually, yes, Henry, that's a point that was made at one of our meetings. Thank you for bringing that up. We do have a drop-in center that is scheduled to open imminently with stabilization, but with a safe haven. I'm
You have
sorry.
one drop-in center
We are.
that's scheduled to be open. I'm gonna bring this back to an area that I know called Chinatown that has 6 shelters with 4 proposed sheltered on top of that, making that 10 shelters in a 1-mile radius within walking distance. Does that seem like a fair share to a community of Chinatown?
Thank you, Henry. I'm going to move on to Tevin Williams of Senator Brad Hoylman's office. Tevin, you can speak. You want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, Susanna, and to the rest of CB2 as well. I'm thankful to be here. I just kind of wanted to state that as someone that was in these meetings with Darren and a lot of, and Susanna and Janine as well, just like the method of, I guess at the state level where we're trying to move towards when it comes to these topics of social service programs, Brad has in the budget, or actually in a bill, asked that we can get 200 more beds in these hospital systems for the people that seek these services. As across the district, we've just been seeing an uptick in people that need these types of services. And I think to Darren's point, when it comes to funding, our office has been trying to reach out to the AG's office to speak about the HEAL Fund, which was money that was allocated from the opioid crisis, which was money that it's millions of dollars that we can hopefully get to fund this pilot program. And I think what a lot of people have questions about, or maybe are concerned about, is, and why I appreciate Gail and Darren's leadership on this, is that if we can get this to work in this situation in Washington Square Park, this pilot program can be affected in a lot of other places across the city where there's a concentration of a problem, and we can get them services that they need with a multi-pronged approach with multiple providers for one solution. So our office is working and connecting with the AG's office on this, and we're looking to hopefully move forward. I'll be in touch with Darren more about this, but Susanna, I will definitely, and the rest of CB2, I'll definitely keep you posted on that conversation as well once we get to a point. But a lot of that will be, that fund is actually going to anybody that's been affected by any type of drug use or mental health issues across the entire state. So we're looking to hopefully get some of those funds moving and helping the entire, our part of our district that we represent, especially with this problem. And as everyone kind of mentioned, it's going to start warming up again. There's going to be some more issues that I'm sure that will arise, and we want to be a bit more proactive this time. So I just wanted to share
Thank
that.
you, Tevin. That's great. Does anyone want to ask Tevin any questions? Nope. Okay, thank you. And then we have Virginia. Forgive me if I pronounce this wrong. Buchan. Virginia, you can unmute.
Oh, hi. I'm sorry. I was on her Zoom.
There
This
you
is
are.
Billy, actually. The thing about the word homeless, it's so complicated because there's hardworking people that just can't afford rent, and there's, the opioid problem, but there's also so many mentally ill people. That is what is making everybody feel dangerous. And but somehow in the conversation, it's always lumped together as one thing. And I think really the mentally ill need the most attention because they are they're killing people, literally. Nobody wants to say anything bad about homeless shelters. Everybody wants people to have housing, but NYCHA, they're privatizing NYCHA. Like there's a lot of NYCHA apartments that are empty on the Lower East Side. There's been never any comprehensive with de Blasio. It was just the developer led, there was no master planning. There's no comprehensive planning in the city. It was just wherever the developers wanted to put their developments, they threw in 20%, with, fake low income housing. So I think there just has to be one new group that's formed that's really planning, not selected by the mayor, not run by developers in the background. And the social services, they say we go 24 hours a day to go to all these groups, you know, but we can't make people do anything. Well, my idea is, first of all, every time to help services, I think, you know, Darrell Block, this Greenwich House is a great thing. It's like giving them food, giving them services. It's not always, doesn't have to be a homeless shelter. Like this is all thrown into this one big lump that needs to be separated out and specialized. And the people, so social services were bragging how they have people on the streets 24 hours a day that do nothing because they can't deal with the homeless people. They should have vans with psychiatrists and medical doctors, and they should take the real services that people need to the places like, you know, Sarah Roosevelt Park, to Greenwich Place, like bring real services to the people and set up clinics. Like it doesn't have to be a whole homeless shelter, set up real clinics. Like, you know, Housing Works, oh, don't worry, we're gonna, the people that in that can bring in weapons, they can bring in their drugs, they can bring in the fentanyl, which makes you crazy enough to go kill somebody. So, and even so, even the drug, you know, even the word drugs is very different between the opioid people, which don't hurt anybody. Maybe they'll rob you to get their next fix, but they're not going to necessarily kill you. But you can tell I live in the Bowery where it's very dangerous right now. And we're all, and I never felt that before, but it's, you know, it's like you walk, it's a different place here now. It's very frightening. But I think the social services need to rethink what their social services are. And I think there really needs to be comprehensive, everybody, all these little groups are doing all this stuff. There's no comprehensive planning and it's not equitable and it's social injustice. And NYCHA really needs to be looked at. You have so many people in NYCHA, but it's getting harder and harder. I mean, what does this privatizing mean? It's like never really been clear and it's never really been defined. And I think there really needs to be a new way to approach this and not this piecemeal stuff and not the word homeless and not the word shelter.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you. For
I have one more thing. I have one more
Yes.
thing. I'm sorry. Also, right now, I'm sorry, this is not your district, but they're in Chinatown, but part of it is your district. In Chinatown, there is a $20,000 revitalized Chinatown for $20,000 that has to be shovel ready. So I'm thinking, wouldn't it be great if Greenwich House has 20 million? I mean, I'm sorry, not 20,000, 20 million to revitalize Chinatown. But it has to be shovel, and it's apparently state money, and it has to be a shovel ready. But to help revitalize Chinatown, what if some of these wonderful Greenwich House social services and all, it seems to be a shovel ready program, set some places up here that could really help the local population to help revitalize.
Thank you so much. And I'm actually happy that you brought up the question of mental health, because in many of the conversations we've had about shelters, what emerges is a fear of that people who have unmet mental health services might be making things feel scarier for residents. And there does seem to be a dearth of infrastructure for people of low income with serious mental health problems. So we've actually been discussing it CB3 and seeing if there's a way that we can address this as community boards, just to investigate this. So thank you for raising that.
And one more thing, I mean, people are afraid to stay in the shelters for the same reason. I mean, that's why they don't go into the shelters, because they're afraid. It's not safe. And social services don't help the mentally ill that really need meds.
Darren, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I appreciated Virginia's point about the dramatic reimagining of our mental health systems, because I think what we've figured out in the last 5 or 10 years is that so many of our societal challenges are about the fact that 1 in 4 of us are dealing with a mental health challenge at any given time. I mean, it's a remarkable part of our population. Look at the folks on this call, and 1 in 4 people at any given time are dealing with it. So just, yes, 100% Virginia, that it needs more investment. But I do want to just clarify one thing. Statistically, it is far more likely that somebody with a mental health challenge is going to be the victim of a crime or something happening to them than a provocateur of that. So I know, just for folks understanding that we're kind of focusing on the right challenges there.
Thank you so much, and thanks to everyone who provided comment. Are there any more questions for Greenwich House, either on the subject of its services and its service model, or on the question of this outreach model for Washington Square Park? Okay, if not, I'm going to say goodbye to Darren. Thanks to Judy and to, where did she go? Laura, she left. We're now going to go into business session. And so in business session, everyone is welcome to listen. We will no longer take public comment. Our committee and some members of Community Board 2 will be in this meeting. Thanks to everybody.
Happy to join whenever. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. And I should also say one thing about the chat. I don't look at the chat throughout the meeting. My attention has to be up elsewhere. So I don't use the chat. Okay. All right. So this, I'm going to close this off and we're just going to go and have a conversation with us. Okay. So as you all know, we presented a letter at the community board, at full board, where we shared in a pointed way, we wrote a report that was long and complete, but then to bring sort of a highlighted attention to certain issues that we heard, we wrote a report with our findings. We wrote a letter. I'm sorry if I'm bumbling. We wrote a letter that is going to a whole bunch of elected officials with our findings and with a sort of interpretation of what we heard without recommendations. There were a lot of feelings about this at the meeting. And so at the end of this, we were asked to come back to our committee and work to write a resolution. I hope that people in the chat, I just see the headlines in the chat, and I just hope that people are being respectful in the chat. Everyone who is on this call works very hard. So please keep your comments respectful, but I'm not reading it. I just see the headlines. Anyway, okay, so I wanted to get people's feeling. I sent out to you guys today a draft of a resolution. And so I wanted to get a sense of what you guys thought of that and what you guys thought in general. Who wants to start? Raise your hands. Nobody wants to talk.
Well, the people who are on the call, who are on the board, who didn't get the copy, is there any way that we can?
Well, I mean, I don't really know what the protocol is of that. I mean, Janine, do you want to weigh in on that?
I would just email it to them. If possible, perhaps somebody on the committee can do that since you're chairing the meeting.
I can do it, Susanna.
Right.
Okay, thank you. If we were in person, we would probably have hard copies, and if we didn't have enough, we'd be sharing them.
Yeah, well, I don't make hard copies anymore. Rachel, do you want to talk?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I have a couple of questions that have come up since we first started talking about this. One is a discussion tonight and at the last meeting. There is a societal problem of kicking the can down the road. We need housing. We need housing desperately. Homeless shelters are a stopgap that supposedly help. And at this point, I'm curious, are all of the current shelters in Chinatown full? Are all the current shelters in New York full? Do we actually need more shelters if people are refusing to go to them? Are we better off trying to put our money somewhere else?
My understanding, I'll just share what I know. I can't pretend to be an expert, but what I have heard is that DHS, DSS, the Department of Social Services oversees also the Department of Homeless Services, which makes life very confusing. DSS has an open RFP, which means that at any time, a social service provider can respond to an RFP with a proposal for a shelter. And the reason that they have that is they're going to have that until they feel that there is a sufficient vacancy rate in shelters, which they do not now feel they have. So I think that the shorthand of that is that there is a feeling that there is a dearth of shelters, not an excess of shelters.
Okay, I would like to follow up on that and get some statistics on what the shelter population is. I mean, especially since that, again, the article in the Times where 5 people were, out of 80 or more went to a shelter. So I just want to make sure we're putting services where they're needed, and I'm not clear that shelters are what's needed in general in our society. Clearly, if they're not what's needed, but
Right.
Anyway, I just would like to follow up on data on the use of shelters.
Great, that's fine. And I think that that information would be readily available actually at Coalition for the Homeless.
Okay.
I just
And-
sent it to, I think, everybody else outside our committee. So let me know if you didn't get it.
Great, thank you. And I think that there is this distinction between safe havens and shelters. I mean, I think that people in our committee are probably pretty familiar with this, but anyone who isn't, my understanding is that there are a couple of different ways you enter into shelter. One way is that the city is a right to shelter state. It by law must provide shelter to anybody who asks for it, which is one reason why there is such high demand on building shelter. I mean, I'm sorry, why there is so much pressure on DSS to build shelters. One way you can get a shelter is that you go to the intake center, which is at different places depending on whether you're a family or a single adult or whatever, and they assess you for a certain amount of time and then they place you with a shelter. These safe havens are a different model and they are designed to capture a different population, the population that we think of as street homeless who are traditionally unsheltered. And for various reasons, they do not ask for shelter, but they are unsheltered. And the concept behind these, as they've been explained to us, is that they are lower entry. They are single rooms, not congregate shelters. And in order to get a room, you are referred by someone who does outreach. So it's also two different populations and two different numbers, because whereas DSS has a pretty good number of everyone in its shelter system, because these are people who apply and go through intake, the number of street homeless is guessed at by one night in January every year when people go out on the street and do a count. It's called the Hope Count. So those are two different populations, and the safe havens are hoping to capture more of the second population.
Well, no, I understand that. I just think that unless we can do a better job of actually bringing people into shelters if they're not full, then again, it's a question of doing better outreach and making sure shelters are safe. But I just would like a little more data on that, but thank you.
Totally agree. And I'll try to get some data from Coalition for the Homeless or from DSS.
Okay.
Ryder?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I can offer what I know about this question, but hopefully try to segue it into talking about the resolution. I mean, yeah, I think certainly not all shelters are created equal. The vast majority are congregate shelters, and that is where, you know, the 100,000 people who spent a night in shelter last year largely slept, including 30,000 children. In terms of stabilization beds, which are kind of the best, there's, you know, congregate shelters, safe havens, stabilization beds that come with additional support. There's only 990 stabilization beds in New York City. And the rate of success at getting folks to come and stay in stabilization beds versus congregate shelters is night and day. Statistics from just 2020, about 75% of people who were brought into stabilization beds stayed, whereas for congregate shelters, it was 25%. So,
hey, Ryder, can I just ask aside, at some point, can you share with us the source of these stats? Because they're super interesting.
Sure. I've pasted some of them into the chat already, but I'll go back. Yeah, and I'll send them after. So, I mean, I think, you know, I don't know that as a committee or as a board, we want to say to take some macro position on shelters writ large. I think taking a position that there should be more stabilization beds, shelters, forms of shelter that we know will work to connect folks to services on long-term housing, which is the ultimate need. I would like for us to take a position to that effect, but I don't know if it's at issue in this business we have in front of us. And
but
so
one thing I hear you saying is that it might be worthwhile including some information on the success of this model.
Say that again.
It might be worth including some
Yeah.
information on the success of this model.
Right. And so I think to segue that a little more directly, like, you know, I am uncomfortable with the idea of a resolution that dismisses the importance of stabilization beds and better alternatives to how we approach homelessness, street homelessness specifically. You know, I think that's not really even at issue. A lot of the concerns we're hearing from the community is about siting more than it is about model. and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but having listened to the testimony over the many hours of the multiple meetings, it's the citing that is the thing that is particularly disconcerting to folks. And I think I would, I want more stabilization beds in my neighborhood. I want them in more parts of CD2 than just this corner of CD2, which, as we know, Chinatown is spread over 3 community districts, and that diminishes the political power of folks in Chinatown to make their voices heard. So that is something I would like to address in the resolution. Can we, I'll stop there.
Okay, just one question. When you say that is something I'd like to address, you'd like to address the citing, that the issue is the citing rather than the model. Is that what you're saying?
I think insofar as we can narrate what we've heard, that is something I think we can represent. Right. And also I think if we can take a position that we want the entire community district to play a role and do its share, and we want to see steps taken in any corner of the district, taken in every corner of the district. That is something that I think is a statement we could make as a committee.
Thanks. Ivy?
Hi. I guess I in the last couple of days, I've been reached out by a lot of people basically are frustrated about us not putting a statement supporting the community. So I just want to, I know what we did at 1 o'clock in the morning, but that's not enough for the community. And I'm sure everybody hasn't gotten a call. I also spoke to Charles a little bit about, I have a history of 30 years as a friend of him and the development of Housing Works. I was hoping that there would be space for him to be a consultant to all the other systems that don't work. Because the way I'm being explained is that there's shelter systems that don't work, and there's others, and then there's Housing Works that works, and there's no in between. And whether there was another space of like having them being consultant to everything that's failing, that is a huge amount of budget as well, but more that, and those are models that are really hard for everybody to digest of how business is done with the city. But as an immediate thing, the community is just in disbelief that they will show up and that we would not have a very clear support in an expression of who we represent. So it'd be nice to understand how we could repair that.
Did you have a chance to see a draft of a resolution proposal that was sent to you today?
Yeah, but
Maybe you might have had a chance. I don't know.
But that's going to go when I read it, but it's not going to, I think we had talked about that would go next month, correct?
Well, my understanding is that we've been tasked we've been asked to write a resolution, and we're doing it today instead of during our April meeting because we need to bring it before the full board at our full board meeting, which comes before our April meeting.
Okay.
That's why we're talking about it tonight. So we're trying to come up with some basic premises of a resolution. We then have some time to actually write it. Because we don't have to present it until later in April, but we do have to come to terms with what it is that we'd like it to say. So I sent out a draft of a proposed resolution. I sent it out, I think today or yesterday. That doesn't give people a lot of time to look at it. So I didn't know if you'd had a chance to look at it. And but if you had, I wanted to know what your thoughts, what your response was to that.
Well, within that of reading that is also I guess it's not an immediacy, the right term, is that we would take so much time to not reflect that as well. I mean, the letter, what we have, it does reflect that. And it just seems like, while the calls were like, it's in disbelief that we all show up and then for hours we're in the meeting, but then we, as a board who has been listening to, it wasn't that, not just that one meeting, that we would have to take several weeks, onto sometime in April to reflect that in a moment that feels like it's already a done deal. And yet, as a community, we cannot reflect that properly. What they're saying that, what the clear statement is that the community is opposing to it.
So would you like to propose something? I'm not clear what
Hey,
you're asking.
Susanna, can I just jump in here?
Yeah.
I just want to just make sure everybody's clear on the process, because we do follow parliamentary procedure, and I just want to be clear that we're all on the same page. CB2 met in February. It was the first meeting. All but one of the other shelters that have come before CB2 have had more than one meeting. And so the initial thinking was that there would be time for a second meeting. We heard a lot of testimony. There was not a business session. Susanna wrote a report because the report was so extensive and we didn't want it to just sit on our website and have no one read it. The thought was to attach a short letter and make sure everybody received a copy. After our board, at our full board meeting, there was a letter was part of the package to be voted on, not a resolution, because that's and the executive committee had approved the draft letter 2 days prior. We heard hours and hours of testimony, which was critical for our board to hear. We typically, at full board meetings, shorten testimony after a period of time. The good news, we were virtual and we were able to go for a longer period of time. If we were in person, we would have been kicked out of the meeting room by 10 or 10:30. So our board meeting went till 1:25 a.m. We listened to more than 4 hours of testimony. I think it was very moving. I think it was educational for everyone on to hear the grave concerns of our community, the fear, and to hear what our neighbors are and their concerns are. So the process, the way it works is the committees go into do the meat and potatoes work. And we are looking at, Susanna wrote a detailed resolution. It's a draft. I am still going through it. But it's, you can't, she spent lots of time on this, whether you agree with it or not. Please acknowledge. I mean, I just want people to acknowledge that you can't just snap your fingers at midnight and write a resolution. It takes a lot of research and effort and time. So that is what's on the table. Our full board meets at the end of April, and that's when we would pass resolutions. If for any reason we wanted to do something earlier, we could call an emergency executive committee meeting. The executive committee could pass something and the full board would ratify it at our board meeting. But that's the process we follow. So I just want to put that discussion in that framework. Thank you.
Thank you. Carter?
Yeah, I took a look through the resolution just very quickly. And, the biggest sentiment that we're hearing here is that the Chinatown community is not being heard. I've said this before, it's segmented, across 3 community boards, and we don't specifically ask the city to themselves host a meeting that directly listens, a forum for the Chinatown community to speak directly to the mayor and to the city agencies directly. The pass-through of coming through the community boards and having it split doesn't really answer what we're hearing over and over again, which is the community is not being heard. And this is a long-standing problem. A number of our committees have met and identified that, through time. And I think that that's something that we need to have front and center on this, because we are not a decision-making body here, that this is up to the mayoral agencies. I think there's a lot of confusion that the attention's being directed at us as a community board when it should be directed squarely at the city and to Department of Homeless Services and the mayor. I mean,
And I'd like to add to that, Carter. I think it should also be the attention of the city council member who has all of Chinatown is in his district. Chinatown is not split up in, Chinatown is divided, yes, between 3 community districts, but it is not, the city council member has all of Chinatown in his district.
I just go back though, the decision-making body is the city.
Yes.
And it is a mayoral agency. That is, that is not clear to people. And it's also the open RFP process, and the way that works is that it doesn't take into account anything other than an individual application. It does not look at as a community as a whole. And the problem here, and we hear this over and over, at Borough Board, for all the other community boards, we've heard this, with many other city services that are located in different parts of Manhattan, that they feel overburdened with city services because there's never a conversation holistically across neighborhoods which don't necessarily match, the community board district. So I think we really need to put that front and center, because that's the message, and I would rather that we have a unanimous resolution from the community board amplifying that message, which is what we're consistently hearing, instead of an individual message on one specific instance, because the larger picture here is the totality of the number. It is not this one shelter. And many, the board is often lobbied, and we have people come before us. This divide tactic misses the point, and the message is really, that they need to listen to the whole community. So I again, I haven't had a chance to look through the whole resolution, but that I didn't see a section or an intro that really captured that as the large message here. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Frederica?
Yeah, I'm just reading this now also. I agree with a lot of what Carter said. As he describes it, we might be better served by having 2 resolutions, but I leave that up to the committee to decide. This is a rare outpouring from a rarely heard constituency. And I feel we have to respond to that. I wish that we could hear more from this constituency, and I wish we could hear more regularly from them. I think there's a lot of good history in the draft resolution. It's always good to have the history, but I think, just reading it quickly, I think that there's a few things that aren't included that I would like to see included. And they're largely in the therefore section. I think we should express CB2's willingness to shoulder our share of shelters in our community district. And I think that should be our first point. I think we need to recognize that there's a spectrum of service options for various segments of the homeless and addicted populations, and that each one of these different models should have different rules of adjacency, so that we respond to the kind of model that it is. Not every model is appropriate for every neighborhood. I really think that no neighborhood should be asked to host, if that's the word, more than its fair share of any one model of these shelters. And I hope we can make that point. And those are the things that are missing as far as I can see.
Thank you. Teen?
Thank you. I just think Carter is absolutely right that we need to make a clear statement of concern to respond to the emotional feelings of the people in Chinatown, as they feel not listened to, and they have good reason to feel that. And so we have to state outset that we are very concerned and that we think the city needs to respond to this. And of course, what Frederica said is very true. I mean, we need to do our fair share, and that we are committed to doing our fair share, and that we, are in the process of having several shelters and outreach and different things as part of our share. And what I heard already about Washington Square Park is people in Chinatown are thinking, well, that you're doing that for Washington Square Park, you should do it for us too. I mean, we need to say we are concerned about our entire community again and again and again.
Thanks. David?
Thank you. I think Ryder's points in the beginning were well taken. I think that we need to, the people had second that, Frederica, but initially, Ryder made the point that we need to distribute to all parts of our community board shelters. It's a problem throughout our district. I've been on the board a long time, and I have never seen such a passionate and collective testimony as we had the other night from the Chinatown community. Part of what our role is to give voice to the community. We are the community planning board. And that's part of our role. We are the liaison between the community and the government. We're a charter mandated group, and the government, I know we're just advisory, but our resos are read and they have some power to them. I feel that Chinatown is overwhelmed. They feel overwhelmed. They feel unsafe. The kids feel unsafe. It was a tremendously powerful testimony. And I think the resolution should reflect that. And even though it may be as of right and fait accompli, I don't know that it is. Who knows what's fait accompli? You know, I thought the sheds were fait accompli. Who knows? But I think regardless of that, that's not our role to say what is or isn't fait accompli. I think our role is to give voice to the community as we heard it. And I think that we have to have a strong resolution saying just that.
Great, thanks. Ivy? You're muted or something. Oh, there you
Yeah,
go.
no, my picture moved to the other side, so I was clicking on somebody else's thing. So on a personal level, I don't know how the process is, and Janine, thank you for explaining that. So I'm just going back through the notes here. So what I would like to know, if you can walk me through what is the process to do what in some organizations do when they come to a moment where you need like an emergency decision making that you can, is there like an option for that? I think you did mention something whether we can escalate, let's say, a case, you know, in some organizations, like, for example, if you're waiting for the next meeting, but something happens and you need to be addressed. And in this case, I think overwhelming, people are asking for not just to say, reflect that, but they want to do it in a time frame that is not within another month. And is there within the system, like walk us through what that looks like if there's a possibility to do that?
I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, we happen to be lucky we have our chair here, but I don't know. I'm putting the ball in your court, Janine.
And this would be a good practice. This would be a good practice for us to see what options there is. I mean, do we really have to go in a calendar once a month kind of thing and suddenly like?
But I would say
the answer is what I said earlier is, and I don't have, I'm using my phone for this call, so I don't have lots of devices in front of me, but including the calendar. We could have an emergency executive committee meeting. I'd have to check our bylaws to make sure we follow the rules for notification. That would just be votes by the executive members. Obviously, we could have other members attend and comment, and we could pass a resolution subject to confirmation by our board. So that is one option. But I think first let's discuss what we want to do, because getting the process part that I'm talking about is frankly easier than the writing of the resolution and the passing of it. So so the answer is something is possible if that is a time crunch. But let's focus on the resolution. Thank you.
Let's go to Rachel and let's go to Anthony, and then I'd like to say some things as well. Go for it.
I wanted mostly to support strongly what Keen, Frederica, David, and have just said, and Carter. I think we should reach out to the city to do their job as taking the community as a whole. And I think we should put into our therefores in the resolutions the views we've heard from the community, and perhaps we need another meeting too. That sounds like a good idea. But I just wanted to support all of those issues that came up, especially Frederica's things to put into the therefores. I think we need to expand that and to have the city take a stronger role in being responsible for perpetuating a mess. I mean, a bad shelter system, a bad homeless situation. And I don't know where it stops, but if we can say something about it, let's say something about it.
Anthony?
Thank you.
Yeah, it's understood that we as a whole body or, particular individuals might not want to say no to shelters, at large. But I think for the particular community that's asking us for a resolution, they just want to see in words in our resolution, if it's not to oppose, but a site relocation or, somewhere else to be evaluated. I mean, the resolution itself has all the details about what the city agencies should be doing if the actual thing gets passed. But we should be reflecting on their behest that they are seeking the drop-in center to be located somewhere else. Yep.
So
That's all.
I just wanted to, thank you, Anthony, that's helpful. I wanted to just share some thoughts of my own. I agree with everybody that we heard voices from Chinatown that described conditions that made people very unhappy. People described being afraid. People described seeing, open drug use and open defecation and people, and I think that it's fair to say that Chinatown has gone through a really rough period in the last couple of years. I think it's lost population. From what I understand, it's lost population. The pandemic has hurt its businesses. We can imagine how many people were homeschooling children for this entire time. And the city, as it comes back from the pandemic, seems to be chaotic and scary. I think that there are measures that the city could be doing that it is not doing, and that there are underlying existing conditions at Chinatown that should be addressed. They should be addressed by our city agencies. They should be addressed by our elected officials. I'm not in a position, I don't have expertise on the local stakeholders and on the existing social service fabric in Chinatown. But I've heard things like, why don't we have, big belly trash cans? And why don't we have better lighting? And why is there not stronger police protection? These are all agency issues. I'm asking myself, why aren't elected officials spending discretionary funds to fix up Sarah Roosevelt Park? I think that what we've heard is an outcry about existing conditions that make people feel like this is the straw that breaks the camel's back. And I think that our resolution should reflect that. I think there's a lot of questions that I also raised about what is fair share? How is that determined? I mean, we who are on the board have the opportunity to read fair share analyses. These are not public documents for various reasons. It would be nice if there was a version of them that was public. They're kept limited because there's a lot of private information on there about actual addresses of shelters, which cannot be shared. But there's a question to me about well, what constitutes fair share? I don't know. I know that a lot of in the fair share analysis, Will and I were actually talking about this today. There are numerous sites that are rejected for consideration. So there is a lot of thought that goes into this, but there are some things that are just not very transparent about it. I wanted to share that. I think also one other thing bears mentioning, and it's a little bit tricky to say this, but there are in the despair that people have experienced, there are inaccuracies that become part of the public narrative. And I think one of our responsibilities as the community board is also to research that information and make sure that it's accurate. Who else is here? Federica, you want to talk?
Yeah, thanks. So as I said, the reso that you propose is very comprehensive on the history side, the background side, but it doesn't take a point of view regarding the suitability of this shelter at this location. And if we had voted at our very long meeting last week about that subject, we would have had a position on record, and then we could go ahead with any reso that reflects that sentiment. We don't have that, and to wait another month, I feel, is really losing ground.
but there's nothing to prevent you, Susanna, and Janine, and however many other representatives from the community board, the committee, going to Housing Works and sitting down at a table with them. They were there at the meeting. They heard the outpouring as well as we did. We can work with both hands on the keyboard and be writing the reso and meeting privately with the Housing Works people and seeing if there isn't any opportunity to get them to back down on this. So I feel
a couple of things here. Housing Works is not who would back down. It would be DSS.
okay. I
Housing
maybe I
Works
shouldn't
is
use the
different.
word back down, but
But in other words,
let's
Housing
get
Works, the RFP is issued by DSS.
then they should be at the table. That's my mistake. But I feel that this is an opportunity for a small meeting that will have more effect in tandem with our resolution next month.
And can you tell me on what grounds you feel that this site is inappropriate?
Well, I've been listening and I'm talking about the oversaturation of shelters in Chinatown.
And where is that? I just want to know where that list comes from. Like, where does that sense come from?
Well, I'm on the land use committee, okay? My first exposure to this was at the meeting. Unless many people were lying or wrong, there is going to be 10 homeless shelters in Chinatown. That's the basis for my concern.
That number is not accurate.
So what is the number?
I don't have it off the top.
Okay, whatever the number is, it's the number in Chinatown versus the number in CB2, and it's kind of a lopsided.
Well, the number in CB2 is 0 right now. So CB2 is lopsided no matter what. Fortunately, with this project, we now have 4 projects in the pipeline. But right now we have 0.
How many does Chinatown have?
We have to, I put it into the resolution, but actually I've changed those numbers a little bit because I spoke again with CB3, but it is not the number that you're hearing. It is not 10 shelters. That's just important to know.
Is it an overabundance?
I don't know what constitutes an overabundance. It is not more than the 4 that CB2 will have at the end of when these projects come on board. It is not more.
And ours will be 1 over here and 1 over there and 1 down there.
Correct.
And theirs are right concentrated.
I don't know because I don't know the I'm not allowed to know where the addresses are, but there are mostly in CB3 and then this one would be in CB2. There are none in CB1.
Well, all I'm talking about, okay, let me just.
All I'm saying is that I agree that if there is an oversaturation and if the city recognizes that it is oversaturation, that is unfair and I agree with that. I just think that in the context of this conversation, there's a lot of organizing that goes around. And then in the context of this, a lot of times rumors get started.
Okay, I defer to you on the details of where they are. But I'm trying to propose an alternative to waiting for another month to pass the resolution without any interim intervention. And so I'm suggesting a small group goes to the relevant parties, sits down, explains what's been going on, and to approach it that way.
I agree. I don't disagree with that at all. And we can talk to, Charles King has been he happens to be very forthcoming and he's already talked to different people in Chinatown. He's talking to he can talk to us. He is very open. So if you would like to, we can have as many meetings with him as we would like.
Well, but you just said he was the wrong person. He's the housing.
He won't back down because it's not his contract.
Right. So then sit down at a table with the right people. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, thanks. But anyway, okay. William?
Thanks, Susanna. Just a couple of comments. In the draft resolution, which you provided, we make essentially in the therefore be it resolved, a list of demands of the city, which are fairly specific. And in keeping with what Carter had said, I think we can expand that to include both a general and specific list of demands, with the general demand being that the city do, a real study of kind of the way that Chinatown has been disenfranchised in a way by being divided into 3 districts, and how, how that's happened historically and how it is now, and look into the fact of, of inequitable placement of shelters in Chinatown. So I think that's sort of the broad ask that I believe Carter had outlined. Sorry if I misquoted you, Carter. But then I think as well on the specific asks, I think we need those also, because those are definable and those are perhaps more quickly for the city to be able to respond. So defining a specific time frame and key goals and measurables of the program.
Yes.
The fair share analysis. I personally think this should not be so opaque, and I don't. I think the city sort of has an obligation to allow people to understand what they're using in that type of analysis. So maybe something can be added just about making it a little more clear what the fair share analysis constitutes.
I agree with you. I also think that I think we talked about this a little bit, this was presented to us as a first of its kind program, and therefore it's being seen as a pilot project, and which means that it will undergo a program evaluation, but we have not heard anything about when will that happen, right? So Housing Works is in plans to purchase this building. So when will this program, which is I think the pilot aspect of it is that it's the combination of the stabilization beds with a drop-in shelter at the bottom. That combination is a new model. So it would be important for us to know what will be evaluated in the program evaluation. Will it be the outcomes for the residents? Will it also include the outcomes in the neighborhood at large, which I think is everything that we're hearing about in the comments that we've had at our meetings? And when will this take place?
Yeah.
So I would add to what you're saying.
Yes.
I agree with you.
Agree. And I mean, the last thing that I would say is I would prefer if we could put some kind of time frame in there for when we are expecting the city's response. I think right now we have some form of leverage right now to make an ask of Chinatown. Make an ask of the city. I think if the shelter opens and we're asking them to just do it on an open-ended basis, once it's open, they're going to move on to the next thing and we're going to lose that leverage. So I think we need to add into that list of demands some sort of time frame for when the city's actually going to respond to those demands.
Yeah, some accountability. I just want to say one thing about the disenfranchisement of Chinatown. And again, I am not an expert on Chinatown, but my understanding from the scant amount of research I was able to do is that community boards were defined a very long time ago and that those boundaries have not changed. Correct me someone if I'm wrong. Neighborhoods, of course, change all the time. So my understanding is wherever Chinatown started, and I don't know which community, if it was, it has obviously moved around a lot, so that now today we find it straddled among 3 community boards, but I cannot speak to whether that was intentional at any time because these districts were written up a very long time ago. Let me just, Carter, I'll go to you, but I just wanted, well, Michael hasn't said anything spoken yet, so let me go to Michael first.
Hi, thank you. I just have one quick question, and that's that we know that we've identified many points, many problems we have with the process and what work we believe needs to be done. Is it possible for us to put somewhere in the resolution that we request an extension of the time before this facility opens so that the city agency responsible can listen more to the community and this community board can participate in that listening process? Is that something we might want to put into the resolution? Does that sound possible to ask for an extension of time before this facility opens? I'm just throwing out an idea, having heard so many excellent ideas at this meeting. Is it possible to add something like that in the therefore be it resolved?
Well, that's a really interesting question because it sort of cuts both ways. On the one hand, it would be great to have a fair share analysis. I mean, in the other shelters that are opening up in our district, there are very long lead times, which allows us a lot of opportunity for things. In this case, it's scheduled to open in May because the building has already been renovated, so it's easily, adaptable. On the one hand, it would be really great to see a fair share analysis beforehand. It would be really great to see some of these milestones, these metrics beforehand. On the other hand, the promise of the model is that it's going to be very good for quality of life on the street. That's the promise of the model. All of these people residing in subways, in the subway stations, and there was a piece in the Times about it today, they're going to get booted from the subway stations. Where are they going to go? So in theory, if this model works, those people will not be on the streets of Chinatown. They will be in beds at this center. So I'm of two minds about whether it makes sense to pause it or not. I think if it is going to be beneficial for the community as the model promises, it would be better to have it started sooner than later. I don't know. And of course, if it's a disaster, you know, anyway, I'm of two minds of that. Carter?
Yeah, I think we're getting into way too many topics here, and I'm not sure that that's what happened at our full board meeting. And a lot of these details, while they're very important, are not what's of interest here. It's a message, and it's
What would you like the message to be?
Well, it's not what I'd like it to be. It's what we heard, and it's a couple of different messages. One, our community is not being listened to. That there's not a forum for us to address things, that it's divided, that we have too many shelters, and then on top of that, we have one particular location. And the issue here is an investigation of what's happening in the community. That's what needs to happen. I mean, and that, I don't want to get too into the specifics, while a lot of people do, but what is the service that's as a totality is happening? And from that conversation, I think that the community moves together to understand, but it's not happening. It's just not happening. And a lot of these smaller details, if the unanimity, a common support for that from the board speaks volumes, when there's not dissenting voices. And I think that bringing people together to have that discussion is the message that will resonate at the city level. And avoidance of this results.
Clarify for me. So I don't mean to interrupt you,
Sure.
but I just want, some things you're saying aren't clear to me. When you
So-
say have that discussion, can you specify what you mean by that?
Sure, there's no discussion as a result, this keeps moving forward, because this is not a conversation that the city's having with the community, period. Where is the town hall that addresses the Chinatown community, that you can invite all the community boards, whoever, but having something that crosses these to have a global discussion of the community so that the voices can be heard as a whole. When this is
So
divided up,
sorry,
it just
again, I'm
marches
interrupting you
forward.
again. But when I'm just interrupting you again, but when you say a conversation about the community, you're talking about under conditions in Chinatown, right? You're not talking about whether there should be I'm trying to be specific. I'm sorry. Because I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to incorporate this into the resolution.
Sure, well,
You're asking for-
Chinatowns, this is one of the oldest Chinatowns in the country, first or second, is a long-standing community that predates many of the other communities, that we identify across the city. And there's a voice here that is regularly not listened to. One of the, whether it's translation services from printed materials from the city, et cetera. The point is that the community is not acknowledged and not reached out to when there are impacts that are specific to the Chinatown community. And that's the message. And then it provides the forum that the community themselves can voice the specifics about each of the individual shelters, whatever it may be, but without the conduit to the people who need to listen, us telling them what to do is not the point. The point is that they need to hear from people.
I agree.
And that's the number one message. And I think that we can all unite behind that
I agree
message.
with that.
And I don't think it's complicated. And I don't think that it needs to be multiple pages. And it's
No, it
something that they
does.
can't walk away from. If they can't walk away from that very clear message. And then it enables other elected officials and other boards to join behind that very, in a very clear manner. I mean, policy, the city's not going to listen to us on policy issues or fair
And
share.
they're not going to listen to communities on shelters either, by the way.
Well, I mean, I think that there's a part of, there's a politics and there's a practicality in solving the city's problems, and they intertwine. And the point is that you have to create the environment in order for that to happen. And when there isn't a voice, it's very different than when there is a voice. And that's been the problem across New York City for decades and decades. And point here is to just give a voice. So this community, I don't think in my time on the board, I've seen this kind of attendance, with a few exceptions, NYU, some of the rezonings, but the attendance here has been pretty significant. And that's the message, that we're hearing is give us a voice.
Right, and it was very well organized too, I have to say.
Yeah.
I would like to hear from, let's see, Ivy, David, Janine, where do I start? I'm gonna just, people who haven't heard from as much, let's start with John Paul.
Thank you. I guess, Carter, I just always love hearing when he grabs the mic. He's speaking to exactly what I was concerned with. The resolution, while well-written, is, I think, way too comprehensive. I think the people who are in attendance here want to hear a position that we have with regards to the shelter. And I think to give voice to the voiceless as they're seeing it. I think without adequate answers to say what is as simple as what's the capacity of the shelters, how can we support this? And if our intention is not to say on paper or whatever that we don't, then what are we doing here? I'm hearing from 99% of the people saying this is trouble for them, and the city's not giving adequate listening. And so for us not to take a position against what maybe the city's trying to push forward, it is a position. It's saying we accept it because we're not saying no otherwise. So maybe we're just accepting that by just not voicing vociferously, no, not like this. If you want to do this, do it correct. I don't see us doing that in a resolution that reads 3, 4, 5 pages. I think sometimes bumper stickers go a lot further than manuals. And I don't know if I see in this something that people could kind of rally behind, even though we're raising several good points within it. Maybe as a compromise, having a position at the front, or at least some more concrete way that we've voiced what we've heard here. And it's not our opinions here. I think we're trying to reflect an overall sentiment of what we're hearing, so long as it accords with what we think on the inside. Thank you.
So my difficulty is that I think that the position that you would like us to take is opposition to this shelter. And that you would like that, and the reason that the resolution that I drafted is very long is because I don't think that the problem is the shelter. I think that there are problems in Chinatown that have that are the reason why people are so fearful for this shelter. The saturation in Chinatown, it turns out, is not nearly what people feel it to be. The murder of Christina Unilee was not a resident of the Bowery Mission. There is what is undeniable to me is that people are unhappy in Chinatown and no one is paying attention to them. I would like to be able to emphasize that point and not to oppose this shelter per se, because this city, as we all know, has a dire problem with homelessness. The safe havens are a much more, in this case, the stabilization beds is a more expensive model. It's much less expensive. There are greater economies of scale with congregate shelters. This shelter would not be that kind of a shelter. It is a more lower threshold. It promises to bring in a lot of people who up until now have refused shelter. It promises, and we'd have to see if this works, it promises to actually improve conditions on the streets. So I am not comfortable taking a position that outright opposes this shelter. I am comfortable taking a position that says what a lot of people here have said, that clearly Chinatown, the residents of Chinatown feel like they've been shafted. They feel like there is pylon and pylon between one thing and another. And I think that those are needs that need to be addressed. They should be addressed by our city agencies, and they should be addressed by our elected officials, who I don't think are really dealing with this. I think, I don't feel that people in Chinatown are feeling that someone is coming to them and saying, you feel unsafe on the streets of Chinatown. What can I do for you? What can I do for you? How can I improve police protection or lighting or any of the many different ways that I could actually do something as a voice on the city council, as someone with funding? What can I do for you? So my choice would be, I would not like to oppose this shelter. I would like to address the underlying existing conditions in Chinatown that people bewailed. And that's my position.
Right. And people might differ with regards to that.
You may differ. It's absolutely your prerogative not to agree with me, but that's why the resolution is so long, because I think that the issues that need to be addressed are complex and on a bunch of different levels. And I don't think that just saying no to this, first of all, I don't think saying no to the shelter doesn't address anything in Chinatown, doesn't help any of the other issues in Chinatown.
Well, maybe, respectfully, maybe it says that we hear you. And maybe that's really what they want to hear at the most basic level. But that's also to support the shelter is also presuming that the shelter system, even if is the right one. And I'm sure there was people speaking out at community boards in favor in San Francisco saying, hey, I have all these great ideas. This next shelter system's going to be right. And it's a mess out there. And so maybe just more of like, hey, it's going to be ideal. This one's going to work, and accepting that at face value isn't the way to go. I think maybe if they're going to do with that, then I would humbly submit a temporary, if the board was going to do that, to say, well, let's have this on a 1-year lease versus a 30-year or 99-year lease if they're going to do it. I don't know what a pilot program means, but again, I don't see how you can support without answers to basic questions like how many shelters are in Chinatown. Thank you.
Yeah, so the resolution, whereases does have information on the number of shelters in Chinatown. I don't expect everyone to have read this by now because I didn't submit it to you until very recently. But I agree, we need to have information. What is Chinatown, first of all? Where is Chinatown? How many shelters are there in Chinatown? In the 3 different community districts? That's very important to know. What is a fair share analysis? What does it include? What doesn't it include? And what is a pilot program? And when are you guys gonna evaluate this? I think all of those are really, really important questions. I agree with you 100% on that. On that, I agree with you. Anything else? Sorry, shall we go back to Ivy?
So let me try again. I would like to, and I don't know what the process is. What I would like to know as the only Asian person in this community who has a 30-year relationship with Charles King, who thinks this program is amazing, that has helped my health in HIV survive. And I know how the program is successful, but I'm bypassing my experience of who he is and of what the program does to what we're supposed to be doing here. And in some ways, I don't know how to do it, is to ask that we could, what is the process to say that we support what the community is saying, regardless of, if you're opposed to it, be opposed to it. But we have not said, reflected what the community wants. All the studies that we want take time, all the stuff. And I spoke to Charles, and it's the same thing. It's the same thing that I've known, is that the mayor is the only one that can change this path, right? So yes, we have to work on that. But our job in this particular thing, as a person that doesn't have, we don't have representation in this community board, because all this structures are hard for us to do. And I'm afraid to even ask for what is the alternative. And if somebody can help me write it, push it forward that is a time sensitive thing. All this other stuff takes a lot of time. And I think as a resident here, I know what studies that take a long time and suddenly they'll be nulled after 5 years, right? Like the in the past, we had really bad experience where the community shows up and suddenly those studies after 6 years don't count as anything. But this moment is a very clear thing. What the community is asking us is that we should represent what they're saying. They're not making an analysis whether this is workable or whatever. That is like for every, you know what, we're not going to solve those problems. And I'm asking for help to achieve that as somebody that lives here. And because I'm getting messages every day about, and I think that it's also, it's not that we're voiceless at this point. We have a voice that we're asking a body that represents that, and we're not sharing that with the people, with the mayor, with a letter saying that. So all I'm asking is,
yeah, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you at all. I just want to know, are you saying that you would like us to have a resolution that opposes this shelter, or are you saying something else?
I'm asking for the letter to represent the sentiment of the community board, like immediately. And if that means like a resolution, I think we should put that resolution and vote on it. And
So
people that are opposed to it.
So there are two different things. One is a question of timing and process, but the other question I'm asking you is just in the resolution, what would you like to see? Would you like to see us opposing this shelter? Or are you saying that you would like us to reflect what we've heard from the community in terms of the complaints, for lack of a better word, of what we've heard the community express about problems in their neighborhood and feelings of safety and those kinds of things?
So Susanna, what I want to understand is that if the resolution of if we're gonna say we oppose it, right? We're gonna have to do a vote, correct?
Oh, yes.
So let's put it on a vote.
But we have to have a resolution. We have to have a resolution that builds an argument. A resolution is not just up or down. A resolution is you build an argument and then you vote on it.
Okay, so our argument as a representative of at this moment, the temperature is that the community has shown up with a voice, that we're not reflecting that.
I just want to know if, when you say reflecting that, are you suggesting that we oppose the shelter? I just need to know clearly from you. Do you oppose this shelter?
I do oppose it from as representing the community.
Okay.
And I'm saying that I'm bypassing my relationship and the success of Housing Works.
Okay, that's great. No, that's helpful. I just wanted to get clarity on that. Thanks. My dog is whining. This is very annoying.
It's okay. Mine is about to do the same.
David Gruber.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I thought that William Benish made an interesting point. We have some political leverage now, and if this slips through our fingers and it opens up and they're going to study it, I would like the resolution not to kick the can down the road. I have a very strong feeling that communities have to have some control over their environment. If they came out with something that was illegal, we would use our better judgment to override it, but they haven't. We're at a tipping point, I feel, with Chinatown. I mean, it's really out of hand. I'm going to oppose this shelter. At the same time, I wanted to listen to what other people are saying, that the city has to figure out what fair share is. I'm perfectly happy to have CB2 take its fair share. We only have a sliver of Chinatown, by the way, relative to other community boards. But what I'm saying here is I'm going to oppose it. I think we have to listen to what people want to do with their environment. I think we're at a tipping point. I think that part of our resolution can say the city has to start improving services. They're not being heard. And Susanna. What's that?
Susanna.
I'm sorry. Of course, I only know you like 20 years. Susanna. I have to disagree with you that the community, I think maybe I didn't catch what you said correctly, that community opposition does not play a role in where placements of shelters. Did you say that?
No, I did not say that.
Okay, I thought that you said something about.
No, I think that community opposition, I mean, the community has no as you know, the community board has no official advisory
I'm
role.
talking about the
As
community
you
board. I
know.
was talking about the community. I thought you made a comment that
No,
decision makers
no, I think
certainly
communities
don't
can have
listen to the community.
political, no, they can have political power, but yeah, no,
Okay. I don't want a resolution for me to kick the can down the road and say the city has to study it, the city has to look at it. Meanwhile, the model is an interesting new model. We ought to see how it works out. I think that let the city do what you say, which I think is a good idea. But in the interim, I don't think the shelter should open.
Okay.
And
So
I'm
you're-
going to vote against it.
Thank you. Ryder, but before we get to you, Ryder, sorry, I'll just let Donna, she's not on our committee, but she hasn't said anything yet. Donna Raftery.
Thanks, Susanna. I just wanted to say, what we heard from everybody, what I thought I heard from everybody was opposition to the shelter, but really that they are not being looked at as one community cohesively by our elected officials, and everything is being done piecemeal. So I really want to elevate what Carter was saying, and I think you were also saying about this, is pushing the electeds to hold some meetings so that Chinatown as a community is heard, and these things are looked at overall, so that somebody is looking at how many shelters they have, what's going on with the jail, where are the safety issues there, and it's not done piecemeal between different community boards and in different ways. And I think something that's something I feel our community board can really push for and have a strong voice in to do that. So I just wanted to support that. Thanks for letting me speak.
FYI, in the draft, there are a couple of things you mentioned. One, fair share analysis does include radius studies as well as CB2. As CB, it looks at facilities in terms of what's in its radius as well as what's in its community district, number one. And we don't know to what extent other similar facilities like a jail enter into a fair share analysis. So we emphasize that as well.
I hadn't seen the rest, so great.
No, and also, why would you have read a fair share analysis? But just FYI.
Can I just ask a question? Are you saying to not open it until these questions are looked into and studied?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying
Because
that.
that's what I'm saying. I think you're right.
I know that's what you're saying. The thing is that, my personal position is not to hold this up to get all these answers. Because the timeline for this project is it is designed to open in May. And I tend to think that it might actually have a lot of benefit on the street in Chinatown, which is what the operator has promised. And the operator is deemed a very good, conscientious and outgoing operator. So I would like to see improvements on the streets in Chinatown. But I do think that there are a lot of questions about fair share analysis. And I also think that, it is a fractured community where the community districts stand, but it is not a fractured community where our elected officials stand. And I would like to see, I'd like to see a bigger role played by people who have an actual budget and can do something with, who have a voice on the city council or a voice in the mayor's office and have funds that they can dispense. Like, they're the ones who should be addressing this community. That's what I think. Ryder?
Thanks. So I think, hopefully to move the ball forward a little bit, although maybe that's naive to hope. I think the question is, what can we full-throatedly and unanimously get behind right now as a committee and a board? And to kind of go back to earlier points from Carter and Will that I think Donna was also echoing, is we can unanimously and full-throatedly get behind a statement around the disempowerment of Chinatown at a broad level. And I think Will's earlier point about broad and specific, and I think what specific, urgent, angry demand can we make vis-a-vis this project that we can unanimously and full-throatedly get behind? And I wonder if it's something like demanding that the relevant city agencies hold a town hall across all three, that includes all three community districts, that it includes the elected officials perhaps, but that hears out concerns about conditions in Chinatown and how they are being expressed or related to this project between now and May. That shouldn't be, too big a lift.
But I just want to say, there was a meeting about this, and I don't think that my understanding, I wasn't there, but I understand it was about, no, I take this back. There was a meeting on 91 East Broadway, a similar project in CB3, but in Chinatown. My understanding is that there was a lot of passion expressed, but it wasn't.
It was just one shelter. It was just one shelter.
Right, it was one shelter, exactly. It was about one shelter. And there was a lot of, my understanding, I wasn't there, is that there was a lot of passion expressed, but it didn't actually change anything. People didn't actually do anything as a result of it. So when we say town hall, that's just, I'm expressing my reservations about the actual productive nature of town halls. But I think there are many other ways. I mean, I agree with you absolutely with the principle of it, that one way or another, someone needs to be dealing with these underlying conditions in Chinatown. Does that make sense?
I mean, I think it's fair to take from a previous town hall that was not effective, skepticism of their ability to be impactful, but I think that doesn't necessarily mean that one held on this issue or about Chinatown concerns more broadly and the, political disempowerment of its residents related to a broader set of service concerns and public safety concerns wouldn't be useful in the near term, irrespective of how it might impact this project. And I think that's something that, again, to circle back to my initial point, like what can we unanimously full-throatedly get behind as a committee and a board? And I think that philosophical set of concerns is one that I have heard broad consensus around.
I would be able to support that. Keen?
I think we need two resolutions. I think one resolution that we unanimously and strongly state that this community has been disempowered, and we strongly demand that every single city agency look at this, and maybe a town hall or something, but a concise, powerful, unanimous resolution. And then we also look at another resolution that you already wrote, maybe changed somewhat, but that one might or might not be unanimous, but that's not that's a different one. So that's what I think.
The only question I have about that is that, the resolution that I drafted, and again, it's just a draft to be a springboard for discussion. It did not take a position on the shelter. And it demanded, it asked for, it noted a lot of conditions in Chinatown and concern about Chinatown.
But I think I think Carter should write it, by the way, and he should do it in 3 sentences.
Well, I'm happy if anyone.
That's my suggestion.
Are you suggesting that somebody write a resolution that asks for a thumbs up or thumbs down on this shelter?
No, I'm asking for a resolution that demands that Chinatown's voice is amplified and understood, and their concerns are just what Carter said.
Well, that's easy. That's not easy, but whatever. Yes, that I understand. But what would the second one be? I'm a little less clear on the second one.
Yeah, well, that is another question, but I just think first one we have to do, we must.
Okay. I just want to, on my committee, I would just like, I know Janelle Collins said, on my committee, thumbs up to thumbs down, who wants to write a resolution that opposes this shelter? Rachel and Ivy. David, you're not on my committee, although I love you, but you're not on my committee. John and Rachel and Ivy and Wayne. Okay.
No, I don't oppose this show. I don't.
Oh, okay. So those.
I'm sorry, I'm having computer problems.
I'm sorry, your hand was up. I beg your pardon. That's my fault for misreading you. So on my committee, John and Ivy and Rachel would like us to have a resolution that opposes this shelter. And I'm going to assume that the others on our committee do not feel that way. Is that fair?
Correct.
Okay. Now let's let Janine talk, and then I'll ask Rachel.
We've heard a lot of people say we want something that says we hear you. We've heard a lot of people say that maybe there needs to be a town hall or something else and address a bunch of different problems. But I think the immediate action is for the mayor's office of contract services and the controller not to approve this contract until some of these things happen, because that is the action from the city that would move this forward. And right now we have a scared and angry community, and I don't feel comfortable pushing, supporting a contract that our community came out in force essentially against.
So Janine, I want to ask you a question about that. Until what happens is the question, because the fair share analysis does have to happen beforehand, and the program evaluation obviously can't happen beforehand.
Yeah.
So what else would you want to see happen? I mean,
There's a couple of items.
Okay,
can I answer your question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I also want to propose some language that another board member had shared. So it's not totally wordsmith, but CB2 on behest of the Chinatown community advises against the drop-in shelter and recommends a suitable alternative location be selected for services, and that city agencies and Mayor Eric Adams have an immediate and frank discussion with the community regarding location citing perceived oversaturation of homeless services in one neighborhood and major concerns over public safety. I would also like to know, right, I mean, the immediate concerns, I mean, I don't live in Chinatown, but I live very close. I walked through there this evening. I used Sarah Roosevelt Park. I don't use the subway station at Grand and Christie. I just walked by it. But I would like to know, what is the approximate count of homeless people and drug users? I'm assuming there's a lot of the same people who are in that park. It's a long and narrow park. And would those people be the number? Where's the outreach? So we had a meeting at the beginning of this meeting was talking about outreach to homeless services and drug users in Washington Square Park. I know Sarah D. Roosevelt Park is not in Community Board 2, but that is the closest proximity in terms of Chinatown and the shelter. And I think getting some help there is important. I also want to point out that I live
Can I just stop you on that one?
No, I want to just finish my point and then I'll be done.
Sure.
The other point that I think is really critical is I see a massive police presence in Soho daily, protecting the stores and the people who work in them and presumably the shoppers. I don't see a similar police presence on the streets of Chinatown on a day in and day out basis. And I would like to see the 5th precinct do in Chinatown what the 1st precinct is doing for the shoppers of Soho.
Great. I was going to say 2 things. One, outreach. I'm waiting to hear back from Downtown Goddard, which they are the arm of the Manhattan Outreach Consortium that includes Sarah Roosevelt Park and parts of Chinatown in its catchment area. So there was a number, Charles King cited that there were already 150 people on their caseload that presumably would be the population that would go to this center. So we're trying to get some numbers on that. That was just for your first issue. I wanted to go back to one other thing though about the remedies, because I agree, but a lot of the remedies and the things that we're asking for obviously would never be able to be concluded before a contract were given. I mean, like we're asking, let's say we think that they should talk about considering increased police precinct and police presence and lighting and trash. That's not going to happen over the next 2 months, right? Or the next year. I mean, those things take some time. So how would we be able to hold people accountable? And I mean, I don't know that we can delay, that it makes sense to delay a contract until all of that is remedied. That could take 3 years. You know what I mean? So what's the right, I'm trying to figure out what's the right balance. I mean, Will talked earlier about trying to put language in that would hold the city, various parts of the city and electeds accountable. And the challenge is to figure out accountable for what, in what time frame. And you're suggesting tying a pause in the contract for that. And I would have to think of, we have to think of what's realistic and not realistic. Does that make sense, or am I rambling?
If I can, I wanted to give some of the reasons I'm against, I would like us to stand out against moving this forward.
Yeah.
On the whole, if this were anywhere else in CB2, especially closer to Washington Square Park or in a much richer part of the neighborhood, I would probably be in favor because it does sound like a project. I don't know, apparently it's a good provider. I have not seen the shelter program work that well anywhere. As you said, it's been a failure in San Francisco. At some point, you have to stop somewhere. And my stopping point seems to be here. This might be a great thing for the community, and in which case I'm sorry to shut it down ahead of time, but we have 1 month to keep it from happening. And I do not want to go on record as saying that I believe this should go ahead over huge opposition from the community where it's going to live. And I think we are here to represent the community, and we are here to say to the city, yes, they should do all those things. And no, there's no way they're going to do them before they open it in May. But that shouldn't hold a knife to my throat or to anyone else's throat, that we can't say this is the wrong thing to do without more evidence, without building more housing. There are lots of things that need doing, but I don't know that this is the right place or the right time for this. And I think given the community response, we should amplify that and say, this is not the moment to put this in this place. Put it next to Washington, put it in the middle of NYU. That I would be in favor of.
Yeah, that would be an interesting thing too. Wayne?
Hi, sorry, I've been having computer problems, so I'm going in and out tonight. So I'm
Well,
hearing
you're in
people.
now.
Okay, I'm in now. So I do agree with Susanna and what you said, and how the Department of Social Services has made a decision, it seems to me, when we were on the last call with them, that this shelter is going in. I don't know that we then necessarily oppose or support that because of that, but I think people just have to remember ours is not a decision that they're going to take into account. But I think we should do something that Carter said, which was write a resolution that hears people and says that we have listened to people, and there's large amounts of people in the neighborhood who are against this shelter.
Okay. So I think what you're saying is that you're not suggesting that our position oppose the shelter, but that
No.
our resolution reflect that there is a great deal of opposition against it.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Will Benish?
Yeah, I mean, to go back on the time frame aspect, which I mentioned earlier, I mean, I would be, I think, in favor of something which says, and to Janine's point, that we are not in favor of the city moving this contract forward unless they have had a real good faith effort at truly engaging with the Chinatown community. Like not just a town hall where they take questions and leave, but an actual good faith effort to look at the inequities, and that if they're not going to do that, then we can't move forward with it. And again, I think if we don't do anything and they open the shelter next month and then we're making these demands of them, there's absolutely no leverage at that point, and they're just going to move on and they're not going to look at it. So I think our demands have to happen before we tell the city that, okay, it's okay to move on. So I think at this point, the answer is don't move on.
I like your language of good faith effort. I think that is kind of clear, strong enough and flexible enough, if that makes any sense. Frederica?
Yeah, I think this whole process is yet another example of the inadvertent and cumulative effect of individual actions. Chinatown is the neighborhood we know about, but there could be other neighborhoods elsewhere in the city that are having the same problem. So I feel that the process of siting these shelters is at fault. And until they've figured out a more thoughtful and equitable way of citing them, that they shouldn't proceed with any others, because who knows what havoc they're going to wreak in other neighborhoods. So Susanna, I know you don't want to have
a vote, but I feel that unless you do that, you're really a vote of your committee on this. And I feel that you're really not reflecting what we've heard.
I just had a vote of my committee, actually.
Well, I
had a
thought
straw
that
vote. I had a little straw, an informal vote. I didn't have.
Right, but the question you posed was just the tip of the iceberg. So I feel it's a little more complex.
Carter?
So, you know, again, I'm just going to go back to we're not a decision maker on this, obviously. That's number one. Number two, the city has a process for citing these. It's divided among community boards. The message is that doesn't work in this particular case. That's the number one message.
That's what
and what
I'm
we're
saying.
asking them to do is to hold on and reevaluate it based around a community. And it's not a position, Susanna, on the specific shelter. It's to evaluate this on a different criteria, which they are not doing right now, that's centered around a community. And
Wait. Can you just be specific about that? Because fair share analysis does look at radiuses. So tell me what specifically you mean.
What I'm specifically, it may look at radiuses, but also they go and you know, that while we don't have a position, they're presenting at community boards and they're dividing the issue amongst the community boards. And the point here is to come back and you know, we don't often do this, but Chinatown is a much larger community. We actually have quite a number of blocks of Chinatown are in CB2. It may not, obviously it's a smaller amount, but it's not just 1 or 2 blocks. And we need to ask the city to look at it from that perspective of a community. That's the voice. And I feel like I keep saying that over and over again, and we keep coming back and around. But I'm
just trying to get specific. I'm only keep asking this because
you've asked me 5 times to be specific, and I keep saying the same thing. And we are not going to win if we ask the city to follow their process, because they clearly feel they're following the process and they don't care and they're moving forward. What we're asking to do is to understand that a large part of the community feels that this last shelter is a tipping point, and that as a result, there should be a higher level of analysis. It is not a question of evaluating to the shelter itself. What we're hearing is you get to a point and it's too much. The universal sentiment that we seem to have heard in much of our testimony is that this is a pivotal point, and whatever that may be. But the city's not looking at it. They're treating it as run of the mill. The process here is no different if it's the first shelter or the 20th shelter. And that's the issue here, right? And
well, except that, Carter, I'm sorry, but I think that the number that
I mean, Susanna, it's not a back and forth. I don't really, you know, at this point, we've got so many people on the
committee. I can do whatever I want.
You know, Susanna, but it's your job is to facilitate the community, and we keep hearing what you're thinking, but you're hearing from all the other people here. And I think the conversation needs to move forward here so that we aren't circling anymore. So we're going in a particular direction. And I think that a lot of people who are on the call.
I'm sorry, Carter, but I am the chair of this committee. And I think
you're right, but you're here to facilitate the conversation, not necessarily share the
conversation and ask questions as well as share my opinion. And I'm asking questions of everybody here, and I'm asking a specific thing because I think that the research that I have done implies that the community is not oversaturated. That's a huge piece of information. If it's true, it changes things a lot. Or maybe it does not for you. But the research that I have done by speaking with community boards 1 and 3 implies that there is not an oversaturation of shelters in Chinatown. Now, if that's true, does that change any of your feelings about this? That's the question I'm asking.
The point is that there's not a voice here for people who are asking for the city to evaluate that based on their criteria. Susanna, I live a block and a half away from a homeless shelter. There used to be one right across the street from me. The concerns of the community are real, you know, and the voice of what they're asking for when you put in 8, 9, 10, it's very different than 1 or 2. And also on top of that, you've got other city services. We saw a massive movement of people down to Chinatown during COVID. And what we're seeing also is accounts that they're doing, what is the community? I was just talking with the former community board member who is part of the Asian community about that today. And, there's a lot of changes that have happened in a short period of time. So there's a lot of different things going on. All of us who are around Chinatown saw this massive change that happened during COVID. There was a very big movement of people who are unhoused. Clearly the drug issues is very evident during the first few days or the first few months of COVID. It's not as visible as it was then because there are more people on the street. There's a lot of issues going on here, but the point is that we are not, I'm not advocating for us to make a decision that's the city's responsibility and make those decisions. It's that they understand that there's a bigger impact happening on a community, and that they look at it with that as part of the lens and respond to the community. I mean, I'm not here to tell anybody, what they should and shouldn't have in there and within a few blocks of where they live. But I do think it's important for us to have the city listen to them in doing that. And I'm not comfortable taking a specific position, but I know, and without digging in, that there's been a very big change and over a short period of time. And the definition of community is a big part of that. You can argue about that all day long, what that is, but the city's not looking at this, or people certainly don't feel that they're looking at this. We've got a lot of issues in the park. I mean, the amount of drug use that, that's happening certainly around where I am, is pretty staggering. I have not seen this level on the street in a long time. And so there's a lot of concerns. I'm just trying to move this forward because that's the question. And I think that, what Janine was saying, put it in front of them before they make this decision. Listen, it's not, they're not going to, if we tell them, that's not the point. What we want them to do is to evaluate this on some criteria. Arguing the fair share point, while certainly on a broader perspective may be important, but what we're asking them to do is to take the political part into this process. Politics often is about what is cited and what isn't, but in this particular case, nobody's listening. And what we're trying to do is to amplify the voice so that they can be said straight to their faces, so to speak. Yeah, we're going to put it here, or no, we're not to hide behind, various levels of procedures. And then that's the hard job. One of our other board members with Rich has said, that's the job of being a politician, making the hard decisions. That's not, right. And that's the mayor's job, it's his agency. And he's got to respond to this community and whatever that answer may be, but he needs to answer to it.
Yep, I agree with you. Ryder? By the way, Carter, I agree with at least the second half of what you said. I agree with all of that about the strain on the community. I agree with all of that. Ryder?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for facilitating this and for including the voices of the non-committee members too. It's helpful to hear from everyone. I think we are moving this forward, and I want to return to where I think the consensus is and where it isn't. And I think the consensus, the full-throated, unanimous perspective is around the things that have been said already that I won't repeat. I think in terms of where the live question from my perspective is, do we demand the city delay approval until some set of actions are taken? And the question then becomes, what is the urgency of moving forward versus not? And I want to offer perhaps a sentiment that I think there is urgency around opening rather than delay, especially given the quality of life issues and public safety issues that are generating fear and frustration and real harm. And the open drug use and the violence, these are things where opening this soon is very likely to help address those. And part of evidence for that, I think it's not necessarily just waiting for a pilot study of this program, but what we know about safe havens and stabilization beds versus the existing approach. We know that of the 1,500 safe haven beds, they are almost completely full every night. And at the same time, we know that the mayor has undertaken a sweep and destruction of encampments, 239 out of 244 targeted, and that only 5 people have accepted, the opportunity to come into congregate shelters because they're not safe and they're not dignified. And these are people who are also very dispossessed and politically disempowered, who are also part of our community district. And so I think making sure that we're thinking through that too is important. But just on the issue of what kind of gated steps do we demand the city go through? There are some, I'm very comfortable demanding that they engage with the community across all 3 community districts in the very near term. But I do think there are costs as well as there are costs to the community, to Chinatown in delay, in the same way that there are costs in terms of moving forward without full buy-in and input.
Thank you. Matt Metzger, nice to hear from you. By the way, your camera is not, your camera makes you look very funny, but that's okay.
Okay.
We know
Hopefully it makes me look slender and well built.
Makes you look like a titan of industry from 1932. Okay,
so
go
that's
ahead.
a no. It doesn't make me look slender and well built. So thank you to the committee. Thank you, Susanna. I am as big an advocate of shelters, I would like to think, as they come. I have advocated many times to build more in CB2. My personal response to this is no shelters in Chinatown. There isn't a study in the world that can convince me that Chinatown isn't oversaturated with shelters. It would have to prove something that I can see with my eyes. And I just don't know if there's I don't want to say I don't know if there's a point, but I don't know if there's a point to pass a resolution telling Chinatown that we hear them, and then not pass a resolution saying what they said. And so I worry about it. I totally get the idea of not wanting to come out against the shelter. 100%. I get that urge. But just like we did with Elizabeth Street Garden, just like we did, how everybody agrees about it aside, just like we did with Elizabeth Street Garden, just like we do with Soho NoHo, I think we can tell people things that we don't believe they're going to listen to. I also think that we can hold 2 ideas at the same time. One of which is we desperately want and need shelters in our community, and the other is that it's not there. But that's my thought. Thank you, guys, everybody.
No, thank you. But I want to just say one factual thing, which is that upon study, the number of shelters in Chinatown is not what people's common understanding is of it. The question of saturation is actually quite a big question mark.
What is it?
It's not clear that it's oversaturated. In fact, CB3 would, well, I mean, in fact, according to information that I've received from the other 2 community boards, it's not oversaturated, just FYI. Okay, so I don't hear any more comment. I don't see any more hands up. Oh, Ivy, go ahead.
So again, I'm gonna try again to ask what we can do to make a resolution that reflects the community and to state that they're opposed to it without solving 1,000 reasons, whether the saturation is true, your research, I respect that. But I also feel that it's important to, what about if like not 500 people showed up, but 200 or 10 and they all were opposed to it? Or if there was only one shelter, but the community is voicing that they do not want that shelter and they want to be involved in that process, right? Especially,
it's a difficult situation for a community board, because a community board, I mean, I've been talking about this with a lot of people. On the one hand, we have a community. I mean, if our community chose, I'm not saying that that's the case in this case, but if our community chose to be NIMBY about something, right? Not in my backyard, we have a responsibility to reflect that. At the same time, that's part of our job, is to reflect even the most parochial racist, whatever opinions our community decides to expound, whether they're noble or base, we have a responsibility to represent those. At the same time, I have to say that personally, I feel that as a resident of New York City, I have an obligation to the city as well. So in the case, for example, of a homeless shelter, it's hard for me to oppose a homeless shelter when I know the dire need in the city of shelters. And I know this operator has a very good reputation. This model holds a lot of promise. This model holds a lot of promise to actually improve conditions on the street. It's hard for, and knowing that when we have 50,000 homeless people in the city, knowing that it's very hard for me to want to take it, for me personally, this is sharing my opinion.
And you know what, we've heard that over and over again, as much as in the same vein that I have a 30-year relationship with Charles King, and I completely respect it. And I funded that thing through the Planning Council for 10 years. And I think it's very, very successful. It is the city's fault of not being able to bring community to the level of understanding that, or maybe this is a separate, threshold. And we've heard that before. But our job at this moment is to reflect that. We cannot close that gap of understanding of what an agency can do or not. I mean, the city is full of flaws. They have agencies that they do not come up to a plate to make a difference, and housing work is great. And I have to repeat that. I have a 30 years of what I consider something that's extremely successful. And we've heard.
I think that and I'll tell you my interpretation of the outpouring. I mean, this is my opinion. My interpretation of this enormous outpouring was that whether this shelter gets built or not, Chinatown is hurting.
Yes, and that's why we should reflect that.
And we need to reflect that, absolutely. And
I would like to, and what I'm trying to do again, because we have spent so much time in this, in a schedule of the city is happening very soon. So I'm just saying, it's like, can we in this ecosystem be supportive in a very timely manner and not problem solve things that we don't have the capacity to do it, but it's significant for us to represent that. And you know what, you can vote the other way. And, I'm supporting the community, regardless of this intense friendship that I have and what I think is an incredibly successful service.
I'd like to say that I think that I too will be supporting the community.
Okay, so can we work on that, because we cannot have more opinions about the studies of this and that. I mean, it's really hard for people to show up and not have and be told that we don't have a voice when they have a voice and they've been organized enough. And for us to sit here to divert into the things that we don't have control at this point, and all we are asking is to represent that at this moment, because the time crunch is there. And for us not to do that is really silencing people in the moment that they're not specifically working with the community, and we cannot problem solve that. And we know that, and that's all. So I'm coming to the table again as a person who has been a longtime HIV survivor, a friend of Charles. I support I support Housing Works 100% for 30 years. But I'm also a community member of Chinatown. I live here. I know what my community is saying, and it's not my opinion. I am hearing what they're saying, and I'm asking this body, which I'm not familiar how the process is, if we can just focus of what we can do as an emergency, because it is an emergency at this point. Otherwise, people wouldn't be here. So
okay. It would be very nice if people did not trash me in the chat. Okay, let me just say it's 9:24. I want to thank everybody for being here. I'm gonna suggest something. I'm going to complete a draft of a resolution taking into consideration everything that we've heard tonight that I feel comfortable with. I'm going to try to share it with the whole board as early as I can, because I don't know that the board will achieve consensus on this topic. It's a very heated topic. And so that if someone decides that they want to write a different resolution, they will have some time to do that before full board. I feel that Chinatown app deserves our support. I have a different interpretation of support than some of the people do here on this call. I think there are enormous areas of consensus and some that we do not agree on, maybe. But I'm going to do my best to see if I can write something that expresses what I think is the consensus here, to the extent that we have it. And we'll see how it goes. Does anyone want to say anything further? I mean, please, yeah, Anthony.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate some of the items that were discussed in the letter and also in your report. The folks in the community already know how the conditions will be because they lived with it during the COVID sheltering of the homeless women at that particular area. I saw firsthand whenever I passed by going to the subway, Grand Street to go to work and stuff like that. So other than the drugs, I witnessed everything that folks have mentioned. Taking up space, smoking, loitering. I mean, I've seen poop on the sidewalk. I have no idea whether or not the homeless shelter itself helped clean up the street on the outside. But I mean, the folks who are cleaning up the streets right now, doing the supplemental cleaning is the bid. But I have no idea whether or not Housing Work expects the bid to do extra work if things don't pan out the way they do with the low threshold people entering in.
No, actually,
I mean,
Anthony, thank you for raising that, because we had a lot of comment about that actually at our meeting. And I think actually that Housing Works wasn't familiar with how awful the conditions had been when it was used as a, as a shelter during the pandemic. He claims that, well, when they are operating that, none of that will be the case.
Well,
And like, can we hold you to it? And it's like, he's like, you can absolutely hold me to it.
No,
So,
well, and that one last point.
Yes, please.
Yesterday evening, coming back home around 9 p.m., I bumped into a CB3 colleague. We were speaking in Sarah D. Roosevelt Park, right? We're discussing shelters, right? And then a homeless individual pushing his shopping cart decided to come within a foot of us. And then he was pushing his shopping cart back, rocking it back and forth, back and forth. We felt uncomfortable. And we had to speak in Chinese amongst ourselves. Oh, let's go this way. And then I had to walk away from the individual. So I myself, living in a neighborhood, don't feel safe at all. And just putting it out there, I also carry pepper spray, which was given to me by my friend, because he says, well, you go to work on the subway, right? You don't have pepper spray? Here, I have an extra one. You take it.
That is so upsetting. And actually, what's even more upsetting is that we've heard so many people say that at both of our meetings. That's what I think is just sort of horrifying. John DeVerna, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I just want to say, Susanna, you're in an unenviable position to be running this meeting, and there's a lot of passionate things here, and I just want to recognize how difficult of a task you have, and I do appreciate your willingness to put yourself under the the knife some. That was kind of just what I say.
Thank you. At least I'm not an elected official.
At least, well, they want to be here. You wouldn't be here if you were. The city council person for this is not here. And all these people who are here in this meeting, that's where they should be, in front of that person's office, because this is an outrage that's such an important part to their community, and they ignore it. Thank you, though.
Rachel?
I just wanted to say that this could be the best homeless shelter ever, the most successful. It could help the neighborhood. It could be the worst shelter ever and hurt the neighborhood. It's not going to have I don't think this one shelter is going to make the hugest difference in Chinatown. What could make a difference is having the community board represent the community and what they want. And I think that is where I agree with Carter, where we say this is what people are saying. Again, if it was a great homeless shelter, that would be a wonderful thing, but it's all by itself. It's not going to make it that whole difference there. They need a lot of things. And I think if the community board says there are so many things that need changing, and this is an inadequate thing to add, and we are opposing it, and we would like to delay it because you're going in there with against the wishes of the community. And I have to say, one reason I joined this board is that I want to enhance democracy in this country. And I feel like we are hearing a huge amount from people. I have not heard a single person in favor of it from the community. And in a lot of other situations, there have been a lot of impassioned arguments on things. And I have always heard at least one or two people speak up for something. And I have to say, I have not heard one single community voice speak up in favor of this. So I am not against the homeless shelter. I am in favor of the community, and I think we need to stand up for them. And that, again, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Point of information, we have heard 2 or 3 voices of support in the whole process, but I'm not disputing the fact. Will, did you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I would echo what John said. Thanks, Susanna, for all the work you put in. It's certainly been a ton of work in writing the resolution and hosting this meeting. I just wanted to kind of, in closing, clarify my point because my position, because I didn't really vote in the straw poll earlier. But I truly do think that anything that, as Rachel said, we need to be listening to community, and anything that basically doesn't tell the city to at least pause at the very least until we do this full suite of engagement, I don't think I can support that. So I think, again, if we don't do it before any new shelters open, then the city may never actually take up that engagement. So I think I would reiterate that point. We need to keep it where we actually have a little bit of leverage with the city. That's my view.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Does anyone else want to say anything else? Okay, Ivy and Carter, and then maybe we'll wrap this meeting up. Ivy?
So you had said that you're gonna work, is it the letter or resolution?
Resolution.
Okay, so so that I have clarity, what is the time goal to have this happen, or whether other people can help do this as well?
Well, my goal will be to try to write a resolution draft that I share with all of you within the next week. I'll try to fine tune what I've had and incorporate everything that I've heard to the, and then we'll take it from there. My hope would be to distribute it to the full board far sooner than we normally get resolutions, because I think that if this is a hot topic, and if people feel strongly that they would like to write a substitute resolution, I would like to give them time to be able to do that. But we'll see. We'll take it from there. Does that answer your question?
It does, but I guess I'm also feeling, so when it goes after a week, how long does that take to go to?
Well, traditionally, the way this works is that we have full board, April 24th, I think it is, or whatever that Thursday is. And traditionally, before full board, often the day of or a couple of days before, depending on when the committees are ready, there's a resolution that is sent to the full board. It's a resolution that has been voted on by the committee.
Okay, so April 24th, right? That's close to a month from now, right?
Correct.
And you're saying the shelter's going to open in May. So how does this this kind of time frame change, like anything we talk about?
I cannot speak to that. That's not. It's not my. The timeline is not in my. It's not in my power or my jurisdiction. I mean, I'm just telling you how the process normally works. And I would say that the only wrinkle in this case in terms of writing a resolution is that usually you walk away from a committee meeting with a clear understanding of where the committee stands. And I think that in this case, we're still trying to thread a needle and find a way to find consensus. We may end up not being able to find that. As for the timeline, I really can't speak to that.
So all night, that's what I was asking, if there was a process to speed that up, because I don't think that, unlike you, I don't feel that there's no consensus. I think there's a strong consensus. I'm sure there will be people that will vote against, like wanting the shelter, but for the most part, it seems like the tone seems to be very supportive of the community. So
Yeah.
by saying that, because we're talking about May, and this is my lack of understand, you explained that to me. So what I've been asking all night, can we have an emergency thing, speed it up? We have spoken about this many times. Now we're speaking with everybody on board. So unfortunately, I'm really bad at writing. So, but whatever can support, people are calling Janine and Carter to do this. Is there a way in the process that won't violate?
I don't know the answer to that question, Ivy. I just don't. And I mean, if I'm the one writing it, I can't write it by tomorrow. So I don't know the answer.
So can we ask Janine or
Carter,
our manager?
Formally.
Bob, yeah, Bob, like.
Well, Ivy, I'm going to follow up with you on process. But if you're asking me to write a resolution by tomorrow, I also can't do that. But,
I guess I'm not talking about tomorrow, but I'm also I want to be clear that April 24th, might as well say
it's actually April. It's late. I hear you, and we can't answer that question here, but I will get back to you.
Okay, we have a number more hands than I expected to have at this hour. Carter.
Yeah, so Ivy's reading my mind, and I on this we got to move on this a little bit faster. I think Janine had mentioned this, and I also think there's a lot. I think the board can very easily stand behind something, perhaps not unanimously, but certainly the vast majority. I don't know what vast majority means, but I think that a lot of the sentiment that's been expressed, but our full board was actually moved further forward to the 26th, but I think that with a resolution that's written, that there could be an executive committee meeting prior to that, and I think enough board members are interested in that, and that there could be an emergency executive committee meeting that's scheduled with enough time to review this, because I think as Janine pointed out, timeliness is important here. Otherwise, we kind of miss, the element here of the whole point of the message, which is getting the voice in there before this is finalized. And that I don't want to jump ahead of it, but I think it can be done. So I'm just throwing that out there. I think Ivy's concern is also my concern, and there is a way to do this if people are interested in that, and and that's really Janine, if we can schedule something that's not too complicated to do.
Yeah.
We don't, again, so many members of the community, we weren't ready to go at the full board, obviously, but I don't think waiting to the next full board is maybe the best thing on this if we're trying to
Okay, well, I can try to speed up my part, and then we can, I'll work with whatever we can come up with to the extent that I can. Keen?
yes, Carter, can't you write a resolution? An alternate
it's
resolution?
not, the committee, the resolution needs to originate from the committee.
So but I agree, we have to do something quickly. And I think you're right, and so is Ivy, that we need to take a stand quickly. And it sounds like there's a lot of time that should not happen. So Susanna, I agree that you've done masterfully, but it's got to be quick. So an alternate resolution, because yours is not going to say no to the shelter. And I think that has to be.
And what upsets me is that if I vote, well, this is just me thinking aloud because the time is getting light, but I don't like being put in a position where not being opposed to the shelter is read as not having heard the community. That's very unpleasant for me. I mean,
understood.
It's not a very nice position to be. It's not a very nice position to take. And it wouldn't reflect my feelings. So I'm fine with anyone writing whatever let anyone write whatever resolution they want to. I'm gonna write the one that I think incorporates all of everything that I've heard tonight. And that incorporates information that we know and raises interest, raises issues that I think are important. And as far as I'm concerned, everyone else can write a resolution. And when they see mine, they can put forth they can do whatever they want to do.
Yes, and Janine can schedule an executive committee meeting and the executive committee can vote and then forward it to the full board, but we will at least have half a position with the exec. That
Okay.
can be done.
Matt Metzger.
Susanna, I thank you for doing this. So just to clarify, if the resolution isn't satisfactory to everybody or any one particular person, they can at full board, they can advance an alternate resolution or present a resolution in new business. So to everybody, I can promise, because I'll move it in new business if I need to, a resolution that is staking a view against the location of the location of it.
The citing of
but
it. The citing of it.
The citing of it. Thank you. But I think you're doing a great job, and reasonable. I will say reasonable people can disagree about this. Reasonable people can disagree about this.
It's not comfortable to be called.
No, I can.
It's not
appreciate
comfortable to hear that people think I have a bias. I don't have a bias any more than anybody else has a bias. I mean, I have opinions just like anybody else has opinions. I would like to find consensus of this, and I think that the problems in Chinatown are real and have been neglected by people who have a lot more power than a community board does, by the way. I mean, we can say, we can scream as much as we want, but the people who actually have an impact on Chinatown, who can actually improve living conditions on Chinatown, is not actually the members on this community board. It's the mayor, it's the agencies, it's the elected officials who all have Chinatown in their district. Michael?
I'm so sorry, so terribly sorry, Michael and Susanna, if you don't mind. I would just advocate if it could go before a vote of the full board. I want my name attached to something as opposed to purely exec. I'm not going to slow anything down, but I'm just saying as quickly as possible. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it, Susanna.
Michael?
Yes, Susanna, thank you again for conducting tonight's meeting. You have really shown enormous patience with the board members, have done a fantastic job. But I am confused about, I know that the resolution you are presenting not take a position in opposition to the siting of this facility, but that you understand others might be introducing it's not an alternate resolution, it's a substitute resolution. Would that happen in executive committee or would that happen in the full board? How do you see that playing out? I'm not sure what would happen because a limited number of people at this meeting would be voting at exec, but everyone at this meeting would be voting at the full board. So when, if and when and where do you think we would see a substitute resolution presented?
I think that that's not a question that I can answer. I think that maybe Janine will want to address that better tomorrow. I mean, normally the way it normally works is that we get a resolution, it comes out of committee and the board votes yay or nay, and then if it votes it down, someone comes up with a substitute resolution at the meeting. I recognize that this topic is quite controversial, and my best efforts at seeking consensus may fail, in which case someone else may want to write something else. And what is, I think, pretty irregular for us is that I will try to share a resolution beforehand to give people time to do that, because it's a thorny issue. It's not an easy issue. As far as the process is concerned, I can't speak to that because I don't know. I think that's for Janine and for Bob, and I don't know that we'll have an answer on that tonight. I think Janine was trying to address that. That's obviously been a concern of Ivy's and Carter's tonight as well, and there's just some question marks around that.
All right, thank you.
John DeBerta?
Oh, God.
I just saw that straw poll you did earlier. What is that? What's that add up to?
It doesn't add up. I mean, we can do an official, we could do an official, we could do a more formal vote if we'd like. Should we do that?
How many, however you
There
want
are
to
8
do.
committee members. So yes, I think we should do that.
All right, so let me lower everybody's, well, I won't look, no, let's not lower.
You can lower my hand.
It doesn't matter because you can just put your hand up to the screen. Everyone who would like to take a firm position in opposition to this shelter, raise your hand. So that is Keen and Rachel and John and Ivy. Okay, everyone.
Will.
And Will, oh, where's Will? Sorry, Will. And Will, okay. Everyone who would not like to take a position, now, I'm not saying a position in favor of this shelter. I'm saying a position that does not oppose this shelter, that addresses a lot of underlying issues in Chinatown and all that kind of stuff. Who would like not to take a position of opposition? And that is Susanna and Ryder and Wayne. And I don't know what Adam Zeldin thinks. So
He's not here. He's not here, so he would not be voting. Yeah.
No, but I mean, this is not, we're not voting on anything specific tonight because we don't actually have a resolution before us. And because it's complex and we're trying to see if we can get a lot of ideas into something that everyone could agree on. We don't, this is just, it's really a rule of thumb.
Susanna,
No. There's
guess-
2 people missing. So I just want to, can I just jump in here?
Can I finish my question, Janine?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So
Sorry.
thank you for, to me, it seems like the majority of the individuals who are on the committee who are present are in favor of a position. Shouldn't that inform how the resolution is drafted?
It's an interesting question. I mean, the tricky thing for me is that I cannot write a resolution that opposes this shelter. So I think that not speaking as the chair, but speaking as the person who is tasked with writing the resolution, I cannot write a resolution that outright opposes this shelter. And I have said I cannot support a resolution that outright opposes this shelter. So my hope has been to try to address the underlying concerns of everyone that we heard at our meeting, and validate those without opposing a shelter. It is possible that my position is a minority point of view, and I don't know, in that position, I think I would have to have someone else take a stab at a resolution. I don't really know what happens in that circumstance. I mean, I know that chairs have often voted against resolutions that their committee puts out, but I've only seen those at like SLA, like those are, sort of standard resolutions. So I don't know what to do in this case.
Yeah.
Other than try to seek consensus, and failing that, I'll have to give someone else the opportunity to take a stab at writing a resolution. And I do feel that my interest is representing the concerns of people in Chinatown, by the way. I really do feel that I am interested in the concerns that I've heard come out of Chinatown.
Just to say, Susanna, I don't think anyone's questioning anyone's motives here or anything like that.
No.
There's a lot of passions here. I don't think anyone's questioning anything like that. And so I appreciate, we're all in favor of a better city. I guess it's maybe just how we get there.
Yeah, I'm not taking your comments personally or anything. Janine?
Yes, I would suggest that Rachel, John Paul, Ivy, Will, or Keen take the lead on taking what you've done and writing a resolution. There are 8 committee members here, and 5 are supporting one point of view. We have 2 that aren't here, Adam Zeldin and Ritu Chatri, and we obviously don't know where they would be, but they aren't here tonight, and you have to be present to vote at the committee level. So I would suggest that one of those 5 people or 2 working together take the lead on the drafting. And that would probably be the best way to go.
Well, does someone want to volunteer?
I volunteer Rachel.
Rachel's
I'll-
vote, but Rachel's vote, I'm sorry, this is just a protocol question, not to invalidate Rachel, whom I adore. But Rachel is a public member. Is she a voting, does her vote count?
Yes.
Her
doesn't it?
vote counts in committee level. Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I mean, I can take a stab at writing something, but I'm not sure if my view is exactly the same as the others who voted against. I mean, I would like to see language that doesn't say CB2 rejects. I would like to see language that's more like the city cannot move forward until they've had a deep engagement with the Chinatown community and the issues of equity. But I'm not sure that's what.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
I'll volunteer you then.
I mean, I would probably be
Rachel.
okay with that.
But I mean, I would
okay
want it
with
to
that
say
too.
something like, you know, it essentially is is not going forward with the shelter until XX, you know, is achieved.
Let
No,
me
I'd be happy to work on it with you if you want. If you would take a stab, I'll be happy to work on it.
Or
But I
if
don't
you
know
want-
if that's in
Will,
line with
You know what,
whatever.
I would agree with it.
Will, would you and me like to do, you and me could do some work together and see where we agree and where we disagree and how best to do that. Do you want to do that? It's kind of a predicament. I've never actually walked out of a committee with this level of, but I mean, what you're describing right now, Will, is something that I could probably be on board with, but I'm not entirely sure because it's not entirely written. So we could try that.
Well, if you two would do that, I would be happy. I would have to be either Saturday or Sunday, but I can take some time and work on it.
Well, I'm
If
happy
you-
to start working on it with Will, and then we can see where we walk together and where our roads diverge.
Mhm.
Well, I don't know how to write well in the style of, you know, resolution, whatever. I would like to be available in working on that.
Well, Susanna, could you and Will start something and then pass
Yes.
it around and we
Yes.
would comment on
Sure.
it? How'd that go?
Yeah,
How's that sound?
sure. Let's do that. All right, I still have Michael and David Gruber and Frederica and Carter, so let's go from Michael. Start with Michael Levine.
So my only question is, and I'll be very brief, would we be seeing that resolution before the full board meeting so that we can formulate our opinions?
Yes.
Good. That's my main concern, is that we will have the opportunity to review it very carefully. Thank you.
I hope that we will be able to turn it around so that people have ample time to read it. Frederica?
Yeah, I don't see the point of a floor fight with multiple resolutions at either the executive level or the full board.
I agree.
You have 17 people here and you've had a vote of what, 7 of them, 8 of them? So why don't you just, for interest's sake, ask the rest of the board members on the call on a straw poll basis where we sort out based on the 2 questions.
I think that I know where you sort out, and I also think that for the purposes of writing the resolution, it's not necessary. I mean, I think I know the problem at hand.
Yeah,
So
I'm
okay.
I don't think we need to do that. I mean, I have a running list as well, Susanna, but
okay.
I mean, the point is, we
little
don't need
sample.
to do that. We don't need to do that because it's just a subset of the board and it's not any.
Yeah, it doesn't
From
help.
our bylaws, it means nothing.
Right.
So,
well, it's an indicator, but that's fine.
yeah, well, but everybody's been listening to this call, so we know what.
Yeah,
the indicator is.
I'm okay with that. Carter?
Yeah, my question is to the 5 board members. I'm not sure if this vote's still open or if it's final or not, is you guys all supported a pretty strong position that was very specific. I'm just wondering if there's any movement on some language to bring more people into the fold.
I think that's what I think that Will and I are gonna make an attempt at that.
That's what I was sort of
I understand,
proposing.
but I'm asking for the sentiment because if they would take a little bit of a broader position so that we can have more people standing behind this. You know, and I think that's important to bring this forward as you know, perhaps the consensus of the committee coming out of it, that's the direction that people would like to see this going. You know, putting forward the question, do you support the shelter or not? I don't think that that's quite the right question. It's not necessarily what I've been saying along the way. And I think that we can move this forward with more people behind it. And I'm just putting that out there. I think that the questions that need to be asked are more important than the specifics here. And I'm just putting that forward because that was a very direct question, and that's very different than what I think's been said. So
Well, Carter, I agree. I mean, I think it's always consensus is always a really nice thing to have. And I would love to be able to find consensus on this. I think that the reason we took this vote, it was really just a sort of thumbs up, thumbs down, just to get a sense of how divisive the issue is at this very moment. I agree with you that it was a very hard question, not a very nuanced question, and that perhaps when we have a resolution, we will find that nuance that leads to more consensus. I think that will certainly be what Will and I try to do. As I say, we'll see how we may be able to walk the whole path together. And that
yeah,
would
but
be
my question was for the 5 board members that voted, because I'd like to gauge where they stand on this. As
I would like to see if we can come up with wording that we can all
that makes
stand
it
behind.
would be so great if we could find wording that's that makes everybody happy. And I'd rather not spend the time right now to, like, you know, pull apart everyone's specific position. I have a feeling that I understand what people's positions
okay, again,
are.
I'm not hearing from the 5 people that I asked. So
I was
John,
one of the 5, Carter,
yeah.
and I mean, you heard my position that I thought we could change the language a little bit, you know, not saying CB2 rejects, but CB2 cannot support the city moving forward, something like that.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see the committee vote on that, because I think that's a position, you know, the committee should take a vote. That's how a
Carter,
resolution
I'm
is
sorry.
moved.
I'm sorry. Carter,
Susanna, that's how a resolution moves forward to the board, is with a vote. And this is the
I'm
meeting
not
where
going
that
to do
happens.
that now. I'm not doing that now. I'm sorry.
So there's not going to be a vote, then you can't have a resolution that's brought to the board.
You know what? We'll figure that out, Carter.
There was a vote.
Do not push me to the wall on this, Carter. It's 10 o'clock at night and I'm tired, and I really just want to get this conversation done so that I understand what's going on. We're not taking a formal vote on this topic at this time.
That's what we were sent. It was sent back to the committee to do that.
Carter,
full
I think
board.
Carter, there was a vote in the sense of there are 5 people who are broadly, you know, that they don't want the city to move forward. Now, the nuance of that's going to have to get worked out in a draft. So that is the consensus. And that's why I had asked for one of those 5 people to draft it, because that was where it is.
David Gruber.
Yeah, hi. However it works out, Susanna, we have precedents, and that is that if the chair is in the minority of a committee vote, they don't write the reso. I mean, we've done that before. So I understand. And I think you even mentioned that the other day. You need to assign it out to someone. If, you know, you'll do what you want, maybe you and Will work it out, but traditionally, if the committee votes one way and the chair is in the minority, they don't draft the reso. It's just counted to what we've done before.
Thank you, David. Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. It's 9:59. Thank you all for being here, and Will and I will talk further, and we will share everything out. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna, for working so hard on this.
Yes.
Thank you, Susanna.
Thank you, Suzanne.